said he would be willing to take American citizens in the federal prison population. Is that one of the ideas you're going to be discussing?
Well, I love that. If we could take some of our 20-time wise guys that push people into subways and that hit people over the back of the head and that purposely run people over in cars, if he would take them, I'd be honored to give them. I don't know what the law says on that, but I can't imagine the law would say anything different. If they can house these horrible criminals for a lot less money than it costs us, I'm all for it. But I'd only do according to the law. But I have suggested that, why should it stop just at people that cross the border illegally? We have some horrible criminals, American grown and born. And if we have somebody that bops an old woman over the head, if we have somebody that is in jail 20 times and goes back and shoots people all over the place and then has a bad judge or a bad prosecutor that do nothing about them, all they worry about is politics, they don't worry about that. I think if we could get El Salvador or somebody to take them, I'd be very happy with it, but I have to see what the law says. Okay, what else?
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Monday, April 7th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. First and foremost, thank you for being back here today after about a week of being away from the show. I had a really wonderful time at the Third Eye Carnival. Unfortunately, wasn't there for the full period of time because of the weather, and ultimately actually got my RV stuck there the first day, which was quite a fiasco. But I wanted to start out by first and foremost, I just have to express how wonderful this community was at that event, just is in a general sense. And I mean, it's kind of it's not just TLAV, right? Steve's audience, we all overlap, but I feel I don't even have the words to describe the kind of community that I felt there. It really was a powerful thing to see the kind of, I talked about it a lot before we went, and I really hope you guys have the chance to experience that. And in particular, when I had my RV get stuck in the mud on the way out, I had there was probably 25 different people that were there helping. I just want to say to all the people that were there, that helped, that were, out laying in the mud to try to get this out of the way, just, whoever you are, reach out. I want to thank you personally. A couple of you already reached out to myself, but what a wonderful event it was. And just a really powerful community building concept. And, Craig Post out there cooking for like 12 hours throughout the entire day to feed everybody. It was a wonderful event, but I'm happy to be back and get back to, it's weirdly enough, the thought that I had before I was getting started. If you had been watching, and I kind of tweeted this out earlier, if you've been watching this show or just kind of like the Collective Independent Media Alliance work, even what we're about to get into today, you guys are already prepped for all this. You already know most of what we're going to get into. It's really just kind of evolving in the conversation, following up on certain points that, what's happened to Mohammed Khalil, for example, or what's going on with the different people that were sent to El Salvador. But you guys already understand the basis, which it seems that most people are still grappling with. And I think that's a really interesting thing to point out. So we're going to go through a lot of this today, following up. I'm going to start with a couple of partisan points that I think are relevant for you to see, to kind of paint how weird this has become. But we're going to get into, most importantly, or I guess to start in regard to the importance of the health side of this. You're not going to be happy about this in regard to the reverse or the beginning of the changing of position of Trump's stance, or rather his administration's stance around PFAS. Another knock on the health direction of the Maha conversation, and even worse, RFK Jr. now doubling down again. I guess that would be doubling down on the idea of MMR vaccines. Interesting conversation, seeing how the major push was he didn't write that op-ed, or he didn't write the title. And now he's coming out and saying explicitly that MMR vaccines are the way to treat measles. That's incredibly ridiculous if you've been following his work in any capacity. And so we'll talk about that. It's very disappointing, even for someone like myself, who, despite what I keep showing, and I understand the problems, I always hold out hope that some of the people that see the best in them or want the best from them, of course, I hope they're right. Sadly, it doesn't appear that's the case thus far. We're going to talk about Yemen. We're going to talk about the bombing of Yemen. The very strange response that I got online from simply pointing out something that's an objective fact, which is that there's no congressional approval, which makes it a war crime. And yes, so too for Biden, yes, so too for Obama. It's not a partisan point, as much as everyone tries to make everything partisan. Our government has been acting illegally for a very long time. That's the reality, and that's what's important to frame it. We're going to get into the conversation about developing on top of the story we talked about in the last couple shows of the medics that were killed in Israel. It's become especially important for a few reasons we'll get into. And then a larger conversation overlapping with Israel, the execution of an American citizen, which, to be clear out of the gate, in my opinion, is no more or less important than any other human being being killed in this ongoing genocide. But it's important to recognize the lack of information, the lack of coverage, the lack of concern from the United States, the American government, while an American's getting killed by the Israeli government that the U.S. is funding to do so. It's incredible. But we'll finish today, the latter half, with the conversation of the updates around the immigration, deportations. And just, again, if you've been following this even remotely, you already know the basis. Yes, even illegal immigrants have constitutional rights. It's a Supreme Court ruling. It's the basis of the Constitution. And from there forward, we can prove that many of them were even then not even here illegally. We're here with green cards. We're seeking asylum. We're given asylum and then nonetheless removed with no criminal record. Every angle of this has been manufactured from absolute lies. And it's, like I said the last show, it's, in my opinion, the most important thing happening to Americans at this moment. Doesn't mean the only thing happening, but my God, if we can't recognize how rapidly we are watching the kind of just dissolution, rather the wrong word, the destruction of everything. And I even hesitate on the word destruction because remember, these are inherent, God-given. They can't take them away, but they're not responding, not respecting them. But we'll go through the updates of that conversation. So let's get started today with some of these partisan points that I definitely think are very important. And these are in regard to the overlapping, I guess, just, the fallacy that is the two-party illusion, the reality of it. Now, actually, I take one step back. I wanted to include something about Twitter that I thought was interesting. There's a couple of these points. Now, Brandon shared this saying, I have discovered and well documented what seems to be a malicious algorithm on Twitter, which began in 2020. Find that interesting. Under the Twitter 1.0 regime, which suppresses account growth by removing followers from accounts in direct proportion to the rate the account is growing at. Now, doesn't that sound very familiar to a lot of people on this platform? I've been tracking, he says, this and documenting it for 4 years. And I'm dropping an article about it either tomorrow or Tuesday, which thoroughly details in pictures and videos how this coded suppression algorithm seems to work. He says, I'm joining a space with a couple of people he references here. You can look at them for yourself. And again tonight, and so on. This was on the 6th. Now, he with the spaces, he'll be following with information. Now, you guys can take it for what you will. He clearly seems to think he's got something here, and I'm sure he'll release information. I'm really just highlighting it as an overarching point that I think we're all very aware this kind of stuff happens on platforms. I guess because Elon has entered the scene and he's the rebel fighting the deep state, or however you want to frame that somehow that means these problems are no longer there. That's an assumption. We don't know that. I think the argument, even if you want to pretend it's some holdover Democrat, whatever makes you acknowledge the possibility that it could be happening. Think about how interesting that is in the light of how many people we see who are stagnant, people that are doing amazing work. Again, that's you guys from that point forward, you can decide whether you think there's more dynamics at play, more points. But nonetheless, I found this to be pretty interesting because I do believe, and I believe that they're censoring people, that they're suppressing content. I think that's a verifiable fact. What that's showing you is simply his investigation around one specific algorithm that goes back all the way to 2020, showing you the premise to start was about suppressing certain kinds of content. Now, on that note, I found this hilarious. This is probably the 5th time I've seen him do this. Meme or just text. Here he is on a video. Doge designer saying Elon Musk quoted saying, "You can tell which side is the good side by which side is the bad side, and which side is the bad side, by which side wishes to restrict freedom of speech." Really making sure sides and different sides, the whole thing is splitting everybody. But obviously the ridiculous part is, well, yeah, I thoroughly agree with that, Elon Musk, and you are literally doing that every single day on this platform. But of course, the joke is that if he's pointing at it, then he's not the one doing it. Obviously, that's not true. But this is kind of the premise for a lot of what we're going to talk about today and what they're doing everywhere. Highlighting the problem that we've all been talking about, but really trying to couch it on one side of the paradigm, or simply using basic reverse psychology to convince you that he's not doing exactly what we all know he's doing. And I'll include this old tweet that APAC Tracker put out from 2024, simply showing you one of these examples. All the 60 different flags that were put on the TLAV account in order to suppress my reach, my growth, it's very clear. This was very publicly discussed. Elon Musk on the 4th tweeted, remember when you could get canceled for not using the right pronouns? That was dumb. Yeah, it really was. And also what's dumb is the same exact thing happening under Republicans right now, which is that they're censoring you based on other words, which is really the principle, guys. That's the point. You can make it about specific woke, left-leaning, or however you want to frame it. It's censorship around ideas and words. It's the same conversation. I said either one, this is my response to him and kind of speaking to everybody listening. Either one of the most tone-deaf and out-of-touch people on earth, or he is very clumsily trying to convince you that he isn't currently doing the exact same thing under a guise of stopping anti-Semitism by dunking on Democrats. Maybe both. Two-party illusion. And of course, note that I don't get to see the two comments below. Who knows why that is? Oh, maybe you're going to show up this time. Oh, that was one. Oh, that's somebody else there that, from a different comment. Oh, that's one actually I responded earlier. Anyway, the point was simply about the idea of very obviously pointing to the thing they're doing in hopes that you don't recognize it or that you box it out because Democrats bad. Really, again, partisan bad, either side of the conversation. Here's another point to overlap with the kind of the woke side of this, which is the same conversation, right? It's not woke because it's only left politics or pronouns. It's about the idea of using cancel culture, using, personal, hero worship, the idea of censoring people based on words, hate speech. That's what this is. Libs of TikTok, one of the most woke people online, says protesters spotted at Redmond, Oregon are openly calling for 8647. Then they simply go, 86 means to dispose of or kill, and 47 means President Trump. Now, obviously, even that is an assumption. We don't know what this 8647 means, but yeah, you could assume maybe that means 47 and 86 are separate things, or maybe that's one number she's represent. Look, I'm probably somewhat accurate to understand this is a Trump conversation. They're protesting Khalil being removed. But I just, first and foremost, I can't stop pointing out the assumptive nature of just everyone in partisanship. It's almost embarrassing to watch. Secondarily, let's just go ahead and pretend we know somehow, because let's just say they actually did journalism, which is rare for these platforms, and actually spoke to the person about it. Do we think 86 always means kill? I think it's interesting. And I, of course, went woke alert. Always point this out today, guys. But what I thought was funny is somebody else asked Grok, what does 86 mean? And this is a small point because I think anybody who's ever worked in a kitchen or even is just objective will recognize that could mean a lot of things. And it simply said no, asked whether 86 mean kill. And it said, no, 86 doesn't mean primarily kill. It means it's slang for getting rid of something or someone. Well, see, that's obviously the objective way to look at it. Maybe they mean kill them, which they have a right to do, say, and present what they want through numbers. Point is that ultimately you could argue it just means get rid of the person. Now, obviously, this has been going on back and forth, left and right. They all hate the other side. The partisanship is completely lost in all this. All I want you to recognize is that this is the same kind of childish, petty, small, lowbrow kind of stuff we're getting from both sides of the partisanship while they point at each other and pretend like the other side's the one when both of them are corralling you into a controlling structure. It's simple. And I said, you're just as woke and petty as the team sport Democrats you so loathe. Now, all this is, these are small points. The rest of the show is going to be about things that really matter, in my opinion. But the reason this stuff is important to highlight is because these are the people who are misleading the ones that are honest out there, who are falling for it, which I know exist because I see them around me. And so my point is, my job on this platform is not to continue to high-five the rest of us that we all agree and we can see through it. But aren't we all here to try to reach those that are still being manipulated, who are still lost? That's what I see my job as. So as I was recently saying with somebody else earlier, if I can reach just one person every day, just one, then I'm doing my job. And so my game is to aim at those people, right? To reach those people more than anybody, even if that's upsetting largely the people that always watch the show, if that makes sense. And I argue most of you are well aware with what I'm doing. But here is the inclusion of this conversation when they're talking about, oh, wait, this is the right spot. I think I put this maybe in the wrong spot. So continuing on the protests, this is the important thing about the overlap. Another conversation about this in regard to the protest conversation going on right now about the left versus right dynamic, right? Well, now you've got all these people out there screaming and protesting, hands off, whatever they're calling it, right? Well, it's interesting, right? Because during the Israel October 7th forward part of the conversation, what did we see? We saw people around the world, not just the United States, which even right there should show you this was not a left-right paradigm US thing. Around the world, we saw people on different political standings, different religious beliefs, standing up and calling out what was going on. Genocide. Sure, you could argue they're wrong, but that's a very powerful thing to see around the world. Well, now we're seeing something in a somewhat similar way. And yes, even that part of it, there's always people involved trying to fund this or manipulate that or provide signs. Every single time there is astroturfing, there's gaslighting. That is how this works. That's not something I think is okay. We should point it out when we see it. But to pretend it's unique to the Democrats or the Republicans alone is simply willful ignorance. The problem here is that now, because you're seeing these people stand up and speak up about what I argue is a very real thing, they are removing people illegally from this country, people here who are here legally, people who are here with no record. And I'll go over it yet again for the 100th time, even though we get pushback every time saying, oh, you're just listening to fake news. No, they were here legally. We can prove it. They had no criminal record. You can prove it. And they were deported to a concentration camp in El Salvador, and we can prove it. Also, Guantanamo Bay, by the way. We're going to talk about that today. These people, some of them at the very least, are standing up and protesting against that. Now, sure, are there going to be people there that are being paid? I guarantee it. Are the people there being given signs by bigger corporations? I guarantee it. Are there people there who are standing up and protesting something they think shouldn't be happening because it's unconstitutional? I guarantee it. So the funny thing is you get people like this. Cat Turd says, hands off, finding corruption and theft. You can't get any dumber than these sniveling losers, right? Okay, he's overlapping with the two things, right? This is not just about hands off the firing of the government. This is about protest. This is largely about, as far as I understand it, the illegal deportations. But either way, the point is stop doing illegal and constitutional things. And both those conversations are riddled with those, even if you agree with the general direction. We've talked about this a lot. So the funny thing is you're trying to bury a real, like I would argue, a kind of building resistance against this that is muddled with other things that are dishonest, and they're trying to make it seem like something else. Obvious reasons why, because this is a problem for their agenda. That's how I see it. You guys can think what you want. At least consider that, because it's always, whenever you see them trying to frame something as one side of the paradigm when you can prove that it's not, ask yourself why that is. Now, this person says, and this is his opinion, this is not about Trump. It's about the soul of a democracy that refuses to be silent. When 1,200 protesters erupt across 50 states, that's at least the narrative. It does seem to be generally what's happening. It's not noise. It's a heartbeat. The people are wide awake. Now, again, it's mixed bag, but I do agree with that in some sense. There's a lot of people who just recognize there's a problem that are left and right, that are Jewish and Muslim, that are Christian and whatever else. There are people that are standing up from all backgrounds. Now, interestingly overlapped, here's Alex Jones on the 6th going, free Marie Le Pen, breaking, it's happening. More than 100,000 French patriots just conquered Paris in support of Le Pen. The globalists have made a massive mistake. Oh, wait, fact check. According to the police that were there, it's only been 7,000 people, not 100,000. But who cares, though, right? Because Alex Jones was right, and they're lying. You mean the Twitter fact check is, you try to make a joke about it. The point is simply the idea that it's Twitter. The idea, guys, is this is what happens constantly. From both sides of the paradigm. It's not unique, but what's funny is you're over here trying to make up these narratives about why these people are dishonest, and maybe some of them are, while you're over here completely lying about something else that for your agenda. The partisanship is what we're always trying to show you is the problem. Not one side or the other, but people who are lying to you for a political side. I don't know why this is the most apparent thing in the world right now, but this keeps happening to people like this. And of course, the idea is to support what you want people to think is happening. Interesting timing with the protests going around. Now, another side of this is this kind of game, same point, where he says corrupt and points to Schumer. You're damn right he's corrupt. These people are, I think, all very corrupt. But this person says Schumer's annual salary is $193,000, which is too much as far as I'm concerned. His net worth, $85 million, which I didn't necessarily even look into, quite frankly. I just think I'm making a point about this, which I think they're all somewhere in the millions for the most part. And he goes, Doge, start here. It's like, well, yeah, I agree with that. But what's funny about it is we already have mechanisms that are supposed to be investigating in personal finances of people in power. That's not what Doge is even remotely set up to do, but they'll probably do it anyway. But here's the point I want to make. Here's Marco Rubio's net worth is about $14 million. Generally the same salary. I think that's the same point, quite frankly. Here's Ted Cruz, $40 million net worth. Same thing. Doesn't that matter? Doge, maybe start there too? No, not those guys. They're on the good side. So their corruption is okay. But here's Alex Jones saying, it's all about to come out. Prediction. We will see arrests of high-level Democrats for child trafficking very soon. How often do I tell you this? Look, I'm the first person who will tell you that this is a rampant problem that goes through both sides of the paradigm. And really, you can show this going back a long way. It's on both sides, just to make it the best point for this conversation. The point is that how often have I said this, that right when we start to see things fall apart, when you're getting people calling him out more than ever, or the narrative that he refuses to acknowledge, or Israel, or the Great Reset, or, the New World Order, the North American Union, Oh, pedophiles, Europe and Muslims and whatever else they can look over there, which aren't things you should ignore. But I think it's interesting. Now, how about we wait and see how long this takes to come to pass, if ever? You know how long they've been saying that? How long we've been told about mass arrests of high-level pedophiles or Democrats or, military tribunals? I hope we see that because I do believe it's a problem. But that now seems like a weird lurch. You could think about it for yourself. Hopefully it happens. But if it doesn't, hopefully you'll be able to acknowledge that and move forward accordingly and go, he lied to us, or he was misled by somebody else, or it's all a distraction. On that same note, of the partisan side of this, I wanted to update you on something I shared in case you missed it for the fourth time. They've been screaming about Mozambique circumcisions and whatever else they're saying, which aren't false things. It's insane. It's ridiculous. And yes, woke from the side of the left part of the paradigm. What's interesting, though, is I pointed out now 4 times, and I'm still finding new contracts that they're doing the same thing. No, not continuing them. Many that started in 2025. And I'm talking about male circumcision for AIDS prevention in South Africa. The same exact thing in Tanzania. And this clip right here is 20 minutes. It shows all of them. It shows how Trump is funding Trump's administration. The U.S. government is funding climate change agendas, studying climate change. I mean, this is not a joke. You can watch for yourself. What's funny to me is how little engagement this has got, or anytime I've shared it, even though this should be a huge, major contradiction. The point is that somebody followed up, and I was simply pointing out, what about these ones to Insurrection Barbie that doesn't care about it when Trump's doing it? And this person said the courts ordered them to pay for services rendered. That's my understanding. And this is the problem with the partisan field. By the way, that's not true. There's many contracts that started in 2025, let alone the other ones that were not, no court order came out requiring them to fulfill specific actions through USAID. That's very clear. So I said, nope, that's just a circulating claim. It also doesn't apply to the new contracts they initiated. I cover them myself. Just call out the obvious hypocrisy, but that's not going to happen. Hopefully she does. My point is that this is the kind of thing you get. You get a narrative that swings through, which, by the way, shows you that if that's a narrative going through, that means somebody's acknowledging what I'm covering, because I don't see anybody else making this point, and they're creating narratives to push back. Just think about how often TLAV is very much so pointing at something that's inserted into the conversation that we never really get, the counterpoints, the development of the conversation doesn't get concluded. It gets buried, and that's how this tends to go. Same kind of thing. What happened to the Epstein files? I guess we just moved on from that, huh? Here's Dr. Simon Godek. Doge exposed the corruption in D.C. Not a single arrest. Pam Bondi had all the Epstein files on her desk. Not a single arrest. The JFK files were partly released. Not a single arrest. COVID was proven to be a hoax. Not a single arrest. Seems to be a pattern. And then we're going to rename this to the Gulf of not one arrest. I think that's well framed. Obviously, I simply pointed out, are you honest or are you partisan? It seems these days that is the real choice. Now, I really want you to think about that. That's not some kind of a pithy joke. That is, think about this. Right now, it seems the dividing characteristic right now is whether you choose to be honest and side with your principles, or you choose to side with partisanship, because everything I see that's involved in partisanship right now seems to be inherently dishonest. So just think about that for a second on what side you want to be on. Now, on that same note, in regard to the Maha conversation, how many times can we see these deviations before we start at least asking whether somebody in the chain, or maybe all of them, aren't what they pretend to be? Trump officials quietly moved to reverse bans on toxic forever chemicals. We've been talking about this. This is actually from the 5th. It says the Trump administration is quietly carrying out a plan that aims to kill hundreds of bans on highly toxic PFAS, forever chemicals, and other dangerous compounds in consumer goods. If successful, the public would almost certainly be exposed to much higher levels of chemicals linked to a range of serious health issues, such as cancer, hormone disruption, liver disease, birth defects, reproductive system damage. The plan's opponents say all of those things sound familiar, don't they? All of these things we're seeing overlap with, injection side effects. I mean, even the dioxin conversation. Like, the point is that this is becoming such a background noise problem that we just don't ever we can't tell the difference. And I think there's an engineered plan there. If you can effectively create the background noise to be so ubiquitous that you don't see the actual repercussion of what you're doing, it becomes something you can't prove. Either way, guys, recognize that we know well. This is just one of the ones I show because it's so striking. We've had in-depth coverage of PFAS in general, whether it's about East Palestine or any others. For crying out loud, this is on today.com. Exposure to PFAS, forever chemicals, can reduce women's fertility by 40%, says a peer-reviewed study. And here we are, as their, MAHA is walking back the bans that already exist and making it easier for this to not be stopped going forward. If successful, the public would almost certainly be exposed to much higher levels of chemicals linked to those problems we listed off. The Trump EPA move involves changing the way the agency carries out chemical risk evaluations, which would also preempt state laws that offer the one of the few meaningful checks on toxic chemicals and consumer products. I mean, guys, there's really no way to move this. This is wrong. Like, I really think we need to acknowledge that. Like, what we're talking about here is them knowing it's a problem, knowing people want it to be removed, and then just quietly trying to allow corporations to do it anyway. And the military, because those are both part of this conversation. If you're honest about this, if you believe that we should be healthier, if you recognize these are a problem, and if you recognize the Trump administration knows that, stand up and call it out. I just don't know why. This is one of the most simple points in this conversation. It says, quote, this will increase health risks to consumers by exposing them to toxic chemicals, says an EPA employee. Quote, it also allows the market for toxic chemicals to continue. Imagine that, a market for toxic chemicals. Right. That means they know they're bad and they have a market for them anyway, because, what's the byproduct of that? Your health. Diminishing of your health. Because it goes on to say, because it maintains the financial incentive for them to be made for all these consumer products. And then it says down here, the Trump EPA's new rule would require the agency to evaluate whether a chemical presents a risk for each intended use. Now, but you guys know this already. They did the same thing in the 90s with dioxin, specifically with chlorine. Now, I think I can even bring that up. Maybe not. Oh, there it is. Look at that. Oh, of course. Is it going to reload for me? Look at that. I haven't checked this in a while. It looks like that site's been, that page has been brought down. No surprise there. Well, I'm not going to waste too much time on it. That was an afterthought. But you guys remember, we've covered the CNN and the dioxin conversation. Let me do this real quick and see if this pops up. The bottom line is, in that article in the 90s, I think in 93. Oh, look, I think we found it. Look at that. See, you know how funny that is? How often on this show we go over stuff that we covered in like 6 months ago. It was public. An old article on CNN was still public. And since we've covered it, the article's somehow taken down. I don't find it to be coincidence. But here's the article on the Wayback Machine. I'll include it in the show notes as always. It'll be at the bottom. Remember, the point is at the bottom down here. What does it say? It says, let's see. We're talking about hundreds of chemicals, and the chlorine industry believes each one should be tested and judged separately. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? A process that would take years of research and millions of dollars. And guess what? None of it happened. You can prove from this point forward, they just forgot dioxins existed, or rather they made sure you didn't know about it. They knew. They knew at this very time back in 1993, not to go into the dioxin conversation, which you know I will because it's hard for me not to, where it's very clearly telling you that in your fast food, they were finding 150 times more dioxins than the EPA said was safe in your chicken and hamburgers and McDonald's. That's legitimately what the CNN article is reporting. Maybe creating larger problems down the road, it says. And so what happened? Well, the chemical industry said, whoa. We can't just ban these things that are killing people. We need to make sure we test each one individually, even though it doesn't change the fact that the chemical is still dangerous, whether it's being used for different purposes. But see, the government said, yep, you're right. Let's do that. And then never did it. Okay. I think that's a very relevant point, don't you? So here we are. The Trump's EPA new rule, for your benefit, of course, even though it benefits nobody other than corporations who will keep making things that produce this dangerous chemical so they make money, are going to evaluate whether each one individually is bad. So let me ask you something. If you've got PFAS, and regardless of how it enters your body, it's bad for you, do you care whether it's being sprayed in the air or put on the ground? You don't. That's ridiculous. And it says formaldehyde, for example, has 63 uses. So instead of just recognizing that it is one of the things that might produce this, they need to go through each one of the uses and prove it out. This will take forever and probably not happen. And what happens in the meantime? PFAS continues to thrive. It says the agency plans to claim most chemicals do not present an unreasonable risk. But see, you can't claim 62 of them don't claim a risk, but one does. The difference is PFAS is present in all of them. So that's illogical. It says, and because they make up such a small part of the products. So my opinion would not be that you can say, well, PFAS is okay if it's below a certain percentage, because just like all the rest of them, that's why they call it forever chemicals, because it doesn't dissipate, because it ultimately builds up in your body. And we know this. So this is them playing on the ignorance of average people. Now it says industry scored a major victory back in 2016. Oh, look at that. In Trump's last administration. And the rewrite of the nation's laws around toxic chemicals by working in a provision that says if the EPA finds that a substance does not present an unreasonable risk. Don't you think if you were told that your child might be at risk, you wouldn't care whether it was unreasonable or reasonable risk? Personally, I think if it's dangerous, we should care about that. And it says, then states cannot write laws banning them if it's considered to be not an unreasonable risk. And of course, who gets to decide? The companies involved and the government that's letting it happen. And it says, quote, they are going to exclude a huge number of consumer products from being considered for risk management. So in case you misunderstand that, they're excluding a huge number of products from being considered for risk management, meaning they're not going to consider whether they're a problem because they fall within a certain category. That is corruption at the corporate level that your government is facilitating, just like we told you this would go. Now, let's be clear. This is in the process. So like I always told you, maybe this will change. Maybe tomorrow he'll change his mind. So let's wait and see how it plays out. But just the floating of this idea, the fact they're trying to hide it from Americans, they know that you don't want this. Now, where's RFK Jr., guys? Where is he about this? This is supposed to be a big deal for him. He's written plenty of things about it on child self-defense. Well, unfortunately, I can tell you where he is. He's over here, and I'll include, by the way, the tag for PFAS on TLAV, so you can check that out. Well, RFK Jr., unfortunately, is over here screaming about how MMR shots are the best thing to fight measles. Maybe he got distracted. Now, I shouldn't be so facetious about it. I too am frustrated, to be honest. The idea that this is even happening, I hoped for something different. But just to reiterate this is on the 2nd of March, 2025, and this is the op-ed that went out. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., measles outbreak is call to action for all of us. And then the subtitle says MMR vaccine is crucial to avoiding potentially deadly disease. And what was the argument? He didn't write it. You're all being played. You're being trolled. Okay, certainly possible, I guess. But my point was he put his name on it. And maybe they did write the title. Maybe they wrote the op-ed. That's certainly possible, or rather the subtitle. I know that as an editor, definitely can be the case. But if you read the article, which we did, it's very obvious. And people started coping. They started trying to shout back and act like you don't understand and you're falling. Okay. All that aside, feel free to read through the comments if you want to laugh about how crazy this is. Same thing I'll get to in a second with the Yemen post. The point is you recognize the way they respond, and I'm talking about just the people, sometimes real, sometimes bots, sometimes just, whatever, and the way you get this waterfall on a certain point. It means there's something there, in my opinion. That's how I read it anyway. But I said, and this is today, here's the post that Derek shared. I'll read it to you in a second. But he said, quote, the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. And I said, many in the beginning of March were screaming he didn't write it. Well, hopefully you have enough integrity to admit that you were wrong. Here's what he said. He said, I came to Gaines County, Texas today to comfort, the Hildebrand family after the loss of their 8-year-old daughter, Daisy. I got to know the family of 6-year-old Kaylee Fear after she passed away in February. I also developed bonds with the deep affection, I can't read today, for other members of this community during that difficult time. My intention was to come down here quietly to console the families and to be with the community in their moment of grief. I'm also here to support Texas health officials and to learn how our HHS agencies can better partner with them to control the measles outbreak, which as of today, there are 642 confirmed cases, of course, with PCR test. That's always important, of measles across 22 states, 499 of those in Texas. Something that they'll always tell you is rather benign. I mean, historically, it was something that we treated as almost like we treated chickenpox in the past. Steve recently played that clip from Brady Bunch, where it's almost like a passing joke where we get the day off school, right? And even he has said this before, and even he has said in the past that it's better just to let this spread and people to get immune. Apparently that logic has changed today. It says in early March, I deployed a CDC team to bolster local and state capacity for response across multiple Texas regions, supply pharmacies, and Texas-run clinics with needed MMR vaccines. Again, anything like that to me is a joke. That's insane. If you understand what he's been saying, what he's been covering about just this thing, the MMR vaccine in particular, going back to Vax and forward, just like I talked about last time, then this would make you fall out of your chair. Either he's being, look, and this is going to overlap right now, I'm going to make the point now since we're getting into it about the blackmail conversation. Frankly, it doesn't matter to me at this point. I mean, it does in the sense of just understanding, and I would cover it, understand why it's happening, but it's happening, guys. So if your only response is to kind of manufacture some hypothetical, which is certainly possible, about why he's being forced to do it, does that really change that it's happening? It's funny how people are covering this, but refusing to say he's wrong or what he's doing, and RFK acting like you're defending him from being forced to do it. Has anybody proven that? Last I saw, this was like kind of a fact-free argument coming from this idea of people that were going after candidates that then Ian Carroll rolled out as some absolute blackmail, except at the end he said we can't prove any of it. And yet from there it became, we all know he's being blackmailed. And everyone's saying that. I floated that as a possibility from the moment I saw him pretend the genocide wasn't happening. But it doesn't change the fact that we don't know that. And either way, back to the point, he is here promoting MMR vaccines. So yes, we should consider that he's being coerced, like any of them, which I do think is part of the conversation, but it doesn't matter. Call it what it is. Hypocrisy, guys. And it says in other medicines and medical supplies, work with local schools and healthcare facilities to support contact investigations, which by the way, means contact tracing, guys. They're doing contact tracing again. They're using PCR tests again. They're using masks again. Look around. This is not a secret. And that's coming from his HHS department. And it says, and to reach out to communities, including faith leaders, to answer any questions or respond to locations seeking healthcare. Here's the best part, the worst part. Since that time, the growth rates for new cases and hospitalizations have flattened. The most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. I've spoken to Governor Abbott. He's offered, Governor Abbott, who's written plenty of anti-BDS laws, and, you're not allowed to protest Israel. You have to sign this document that says you won't boycott them in order to get funds after a hurricane, all that stuff. Interesting overlap, in case it matters. So, this is interesting. Look at this. I'm surprised. See, funny, I got distracted with other things, and I never followed up with this. I was curious to see how Del Bigtree would respond to this the last time, because, it was pretty quiet. I didn't see him respond the first few days that came out. Here he is responding. Let's read it. It says, your post got cut off. It says, the MMR is also one of the most effective ways to cause autism, as witnessed by millions of parents worldwide and covered up by the CDC's fraudulent study at the heart of this documentary. Good for you, Del. See, that makes me happy to see, because, guys, there's just no way. Remember, Del Bigtree, Andrew Wakefield, Brian Hooker, these people were like the front line for this conversation back then. And RFK Jr. was right there. He was fighting this battle with the lawsuits. And how do you make sense of this? This is you're being betrayed, guys, and maybe he's being coerced. That doesn't change the fact that this is something we need to acknowledge. So I'm glad to see Del Bigtree speaking out about this. Oh, and then I want to read to you what Derek said. So here's what Derek said in response to this. He said, and he quoted what he said, the most effective way to prevent MMR. And he said, many of you made excuses after the Fox op-ed, but now it's clear. He's embracing and promoting the MMR vax. I know lots of people want to have hope in these people, but I can't believe they fell for it. So many of us tried to warn about this relationship with Epstein, his undying Zionism, and biotech investments were warning signs. Hopefully those who really want to make America healthy again will realize it's not going to happen through government. Take personal responsibility for your lives. Now, you know what the worst, hardest things about this is that people like Derek and I and Whitney and the kind of impetus for starting the IMA. Here he is trying to show you what he's talking about. Right? Like Derek is literally saying, like, look, we tried to warn you. He's not, rubbing it in your face necessarily, just simply saying, look, we tried to show you this was possible. And instead of pretending like he's somehow on the other side, whatever that means to you, recognize that he's always been right there in the middle of it, saying this is a problem. I don't care if it's Biden. I don't care if it's Trump, left or right. This is something we care about. Just note the consistency, right? The objectivity, regardless of what side says whatever. And yet people still try to pin it on some kind of a narrative or some kind of an objective. Consider those things, but look at what he's been doing up until now. Look at what he continues to do. Look at the precedent. Derek has proven to you that he's fighting for what he believes in an objective, nonpartisan way. I think that matters. The track record is there. Now, Clint Russell says, hey, Bobby, just blink twice if you're being blackmailed. This is damning. Even this post to me, it's like, what is the point of this? To show others out there that you think he's being blackmailed? You guys have already been very clear about that. Where is the evidence for this? If he's being blackmailed, then prove that. Or at least the idea, and I'm not saying he needs to or that he thinks that. Maybe he thinks it's possible. My point is that right now this conversation is becoming that whether you say or not, that somehow the overarching frame is that he's being forced to do this. Therefore, he's not the one we condemn. He's not the one we call out. So it doesn't matter whether you think it's him being coerced or not. If you're pulling punches over RFK Jr., you're not stopping the problem because he's the one rolling this stuff out, whether he's being coerced or not. Now, the point he's highlighting here is right, showing the tweet about MMR and then showing at least a little screenshot of, and I can agree this is a lot of, like I said, you look at his work going back a long way. What he's saying today is absolutely ridiculous. But it says journalists should have long ago exposed the fact that Children's Health Defense is making manifest. Measles outbreaks have been fabricated to create fear. How do you go from making that opinion to where we are now with what he's saying? Or, as it says, oh, and this is the largest, says they then inflict unnecessary and risky vaccines on millions of children. I mean, these are coming from things that he has argued and discussed. So I agree with that, but I just don't think it's right to pretend that we know or even suggest he's being blackmailed without a shred of evidence to back it up. As you know, I agree. It is certainly possible, likely even, but I don't see anything to even a shred of evidence to prove that's happening other than this person may have this interest and they're accessing, they have close access to him and are tied into Israel. Certainly possible, but I'd like to see some facts. Now, last point on this, as Bread and Circus points out, they're highlighting again this measles outbreak claim, right? And we know from the last time, guys, we talked about this too. They are lying about a lot of this stuff. Like we've talked about this going back a long way with a lot of things. For example, Ben Swann, not Ben Shapiro, Ben Swann covered the kratom overlap, where they were trying to prove that kratom was dangerous. Like anything, everything in moderation is my opinion. But the point is that they were trying to claim it was deadly. In my opinion, it was because it was being used very productively to pull people off of opioids. And what did they say? Well, it's killing everybody. And then Ben Swann went through the actual the claims, and one of them was literally a guy who got shot in the chest with a shotgun and had kratom in his system, and they wrote down kratom as the reason he died. I'm not making it up. Ben Swann's covered it before. So this is the kind of thing, we know that these entities are manufacturing stuff. And we know in particular the measles point has been done before. So it says measles outbreak claims the life of a second child. Now, I also, the information that I'm seeing as well suggests that he didn't die from measles, but ultimately died. And as he says, the child's family gave Dr. Pierre Corey. So to be objective, this is stemming from what Pierre Corey is getting from his family. So consider that. But it says to the relevant medical records that said the child died from a mistake made by the hospital. The child has already recovered from measles when he developed a secondary pneumonia. Doesn't this sound familiar? Doctor then gave the kid the wrong combination of antibiotics. Here's, you couldn't see it. Here's what I was showing. Now, again, guys, this is up in the air. It's subjective. This is information they gave. Now, I haven't looked, Pierre Corey may have put some information out since I saw this, but recognize that this is not new. And really, that's a passing point for me, because the point for me is that I think we've definitively proven the MMR shot is dangerous. Here we are using it, or they're putting it forward. Now, same kind of a point about contradiction. Now we're going to get into the foreign policy side of this. This one was telling. The response to this, the reaction that we got from people. Now, what I did in this post is very interesting. Basically, simply grabbed what was a tweet from Trump that said, these Houthis gathered for instructions on an attack with no evidence to back it up whatsoever. And then says, oops, there will be no attack by these Houthis. Now, I just have to comment. I mean, it's the lack of decorum is embarrassing. Just legitimately embarrassing. Like them going back and forth with Bukele and him tweeting, going, oopsie, looks like they land too late. Like these people are acting like they're juveniles. And this is a very serious reality. I mean, this is a war crime. And understand, whether or not they're civilians, there's no authorization for military acts, guys. This is an act of war, whether there's a declaration of war or not, by definition. Congress has the congressional authority to do that. Now, understand, regardless of Patriot Act or the Wars Power Act, the point is the Constitution. So regardless of if they pass a law that says somehow that that's not the reality, then it's undermining the Constitution. It is repugnant to the Constitution. We have to understand how many things are like that today. If it's repugnant to the Constitution, it is null and void. That is Mayberry versus Madison. There's plenty of others, by the way, Supreme Court rulings. My point is that we can continue to allow the illegitimate government to pass all sorts of unconstitutional laws and continue to pretend like that's somehow the reality. I mean, how long have we been recognizing this has been continuing? Even if you want to pretend that they somehow have the authorization of military force from 9/11 that will run to today, despite how none of this is even tangentially connected to 9/11. I mean, it's an excuse. So it is, regardless a war crime, just like it was a war crime with Biden or Trump or Obama did the same things. It doesn't change the fact. This is still one of them. But the way he says gathered for instruction on attack, I mean, you realize that even from their information, there is nothing to back that up. Now, sure, they may have some secret document back there. Wouldn't you think they would show that to convince people that they weren't murdering people in Yemen? On top of that, even if they did show you something, it's funny to me that we now have the supposed rebels who are blindly taking everything the government says at absolute face value. Way to push back on the power structure, guys. I mean, you're fighting the deep state by literally supporting the deep state agenda. And then it goes on to say they will never sink our ships again, except they never have, which is easily verifiable in any context. You see, this is straight up dishonest. And everything they're doing, they're trying, just like when Trump grabbed the microphone after COVID began and said, China did everything, and before we had any evidence. Why do you think that is? Because they set the tone, and everyone follows suit that knows they're just following marching orders. And I think we all damn well know at the very least, if it was there, the U.S. was involved from day one. So there's a reason they do this. I don't know why we can't learn from this. Now, I grabbed what Khaleesi shared, which is right here. She showed you by the way, remembering this is not new, and this is not even just only the two times, the collateral murder video, where, yes, the U.S. government murdered both journalists and innocent civilians and covered it up, and then they got caught for it. The point is, all they ever did from that point forward was go after anybody that revealed that they broke the law. Not a single person to date has ever gone to jail for the crime. Many have been arrested, and a lot worse, because they exposed the crime. You know, democracy, right? But she said WikiLeaks had to expose U.S. war crimes in Iraq. Now the president just posts them himself. The only difference between collateral murder and Trump's Yemen strike video, one was leaked, the other was broadcast. Then she follows up and says, this is how tribes in Yemen gather. They were civilians, and Trump bombed them while celebrating, I think it's EID. The point is, this is what she's claiming. Now, I'm going to show you the reports coming from the ground that are claiming the same thing. All the people screaming in the Twitter conversation, I guess, didn't care that there's more than just a screenshot. But I guess in their world, Twitter files world, screenshots are all that matter, right? But tribal meeting in different locations, and the point is that this is a common thing you're going to see. I mean, exactly like this. Not Houthis, but just the tribal people of Yemen who have been starved and suppressed and attacked for decades by the U.S. and Israel and Saudi Arabia. So the point is simply to consider that's obviously a valid point. Consider for yourself. I simply shared the image because I feel like that was relevant. And I said, and this is the only thing I said, it takes a special kind of stupid to think this was anything other than a war crime. Now, I think it's funny. Now, I set these things up for a reason to make sure that people, the assumptive nature of the partisan field is embarrassing today. So my point was, it's a war crime. Now, you could assume that I meant because they're civilians, which that would be possible. I put the picture in there. The obvious reality is this is a war crime because there was no congressional authorization for the act of war that it was. Just like it was, like I said, for every past president. It's not unique to Trump, like people want me to pretend that it is. But the amount of response with the people, I mean, their hair on fire, completely flailing and screaming about how, you don't know what the intelligence they have. Okay, well, neither do you. So the argument that you're claiming it's not is just as dumb as to claim it is if it was only based on the claim they were civilians. My claim is it is a war crime regardless, by default, by constitutional law, because it is. Just like when Biden did the same things in Yemen, they were also war crimes, which I said then. This to me is insane because this is, look, just so you look at the clip of he's sharing. You have a bunch of people literally standing in one of these kind of, what do you call rectangle, circle-ish kind of thing. Now, are we going to pretend that this is how the Houthis will gather in instructions on an attack in the middle? I mean, it logically makes no sense. And if you understand, I mean, I've had many interviews in the past with Hussein al-Bukaidi, for example, from Yemen, way back when this was ongoing, when that was one of the largest things we were talking about, the ongoing starvation of Yemen from Saudi Arabia with U.S. help. This is not the reality of how that operates. Now, maybe they did it to hide something. It's always possible. The reality is that just because he says that does not make it the reality. And we should know that by now. Now, to get into more of the details, here, antiwar.com. On Saturday, now, yes, Yemen's news agency reported that footage shared by President Trump that showed an airstrike on Yemen that they claim hit a religious gathering, not a Houthi military meeting, as the president claimed. Now, obviously, just like you wouldn't blindly take Trump's word or the president's word at face value, you also wouldn't take any group that's involved at face value. That's just objective reality. Now, what would be next then? Seeing as how nobody's got proven it, right? What would we do next? Well, we would ask for evidence. So clearly Trump seems to know for sure, right? So present the evidence. Now, this is not the weird response you get from Republicans right now is somehow like, that's how dare you? How dare you demand that you don't get to know? Well, yeah, you're damn right we do. This is American. We are Americans in a situation where we're pretending at the very least that these are people acting with our will within the Constitution, of course. And what does that demand? That we have the right to know whether or not this happened a certain way, or that if he broke the law, guys. So if they don't show you any evidence, why would you assume that he's telling you the truth? Wouldn't it be easy to go, here's the evidence, see how we can show you that these were all Houthis, look at all their guns? They could do that if that was the reality. I'm pretty clearly convinced that was not the reality for multiple reasons. But he goes on to say, Trump added that the Houthis, officially known as the Ansar Allah movement, will, quote, never sink our ships again, as I said. And they say, although there's have been no known incidents of the Yemeni group sinking an American ship. So why would he lie about that? To convince you that that has been the case. And right now, look on Twitter. You're going to see examples across the board of people claiming they've been sinking our ships, protecting shipping lanes, even though that's not even remotely been what's happening. Unless you're delivering weapons to Israel, they haven't been bothering you, and particularly have not had a single casualty, guys. How are you going to pretend like they're pirates, that they haven't stolen anything? There's no casualties. And if they have a ceasefire, every time they've stopped. But let's pretend like they just want to steal everything. No, that's the group that are doing this. That's the groups. That is the U.S. and Israel who are rapidly doing that around the world. But it says in response to the post, a source said that the Yemeni agency, that the video showed an airstrike on a gathering in a religious gathering, the Muslim holiday that marks the end of Ramadan. Quote, the source explained that the video clip published by the criminal Trump claiming that it was a gathering of military leaders was merely an event for the religious holiday. And it says the report said, and by the way, so it's relevant to the conversation specifically in the Hodeidah province. Now, those that have been following along are very aware of how important the port of Hodeidah has been to this ongoing conversation. So I don't think that's coincidence. And it says the report said that the source, quote, emphasized that those present at the gathering had no connection to the operations carried out by the Yemeni armed forces, which are implementing the decision to ban navigation on specifically ships linked to the American-Israeli enemy, as the criminal Trump claimed. The point is they're not going after just anything passing anywhere. But it says a member of the U.S. and Saudi-backed Yemeni government in exile. So to make sure you understand that, it's a random group of illegal people that have no connection to Yemen that are being tried to be forced in as the control structure, that have never been accepted by the people of Yemen, who live in Saudi Arabia. And they go, hey, what do you think's going on over there in Yemen? They're killing a bad guy, you Houthi terrorists. So ask yourself, what's in their interest? A group of people that are working with the United States to take over a group of territory that they don't have the right to take over. His name is Hadi, by the way. We've talked about it a very long time. He's the illegal president that they forced into power, that the Yemeni people did not take, and the Houthis are the popular structure of the Yemeni people largely support, and it's very easy to prove. So why in the world you would ask them? That's like asking Trump what he thinks. He clearly has an agenda. But it says, and again, it says based in Saudi Arabia, it says he claimed the U.S. strike killed 70 Houthi fighters and several Iranian advisors, but offered no evidence for the claim. At the time of the attack, there was no reports of Yemeni media of major casualties in Hodeidah. It says the U.S. military has shared virtually no details about its bombing campaign in Yemen and has not offered specifics about the video that Trump posted. The president shared the footage on the same day that the New York Times reported that the daily airstrikes on Yemen, get this, have had limited success, as the Houthis are not deterred and are not backing down, which, by the way, is nothing new. Biden did the same thing. They have shown the resilience. They've shown that this has had zero effect on their ability to continue doing this. And a usual bombastic Trump comes out and says, if you don't, we're going to bomb you into forever, kill you more than we've ever done before, whatever's, his bombastic, completely hypothetical or hyperbolic statements always are. And nothing stopped so far. And then we just realize that this is killing innocent people, whether this was civilians or not. That's what they're doing. They just literally bombed an entire building full of people in the capital of Yemen. That's not a Houthi capital. That is the capital of Yemen. Sana'a is a massively civilian-packed area. And Pete Hegseth goes on Fox and says, we bombed the Houthi capital, and all the mindless followers pretend like it was some kind of terrorist stronghold. Just like that's what they've been doing in Israel, in Gaza. So why not do the same thing? Apparently works for the people that blindly follow them. But it says the U.S. bombing campaign had a heavy toll on civilians, with at least 25 civilians being killed in the first week from March 15th to March 21st. Nothing new. Now, it's not even partisan, guys. Biden did the same damn thing. Now, what's interesting about this is somebody was posting this, which I think is relevant to include today for, not the way that they think it would play, but this is, people were acting like in regard to the authorization from Congress. Because again, let's be very clear about this, that they're required to get authorization from Congress for any act of war. Not just declarations of war, mind you, but just any act of war, whether or not you've had a declared war or not. That's what that would apply. An act of war is what we just saw. And they don't have that. Neither did presidents before this, but it doesn't change the fact that it's a war crime. That's an illegal act. So what they put forward is the idea, and this is what I was saying before about the unconstitutional reality of this. The president, this is from 2001. Think about how long this has been going on. And every president since then have kicked this down the road because this is an agenda. The president's constitutional authority, of course, they frame it like that, to conduct military operations against terrorists and nations supporting them. Now, I argue from day one this was unconstitutional because it is, guys. It's very easy to see why. But I'm going to go into this from whether or not this connects. Let's just even say you pretend that this is valid. How you want to pretend that this today connects to this is insane to me. September 25th, 2001, and it says the president has broad constitutional power, and just because they write that does not make that the reality, to take military action in response to the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11th, 2001. Now, not even getting into the reality of what actually happened, and it was not a bunch of Muslims hijacking planes. We know what this really was. The reality is that this is not connected to today. It says Congress has acknowledged this inherent executive power in both war powers resolutions and the joint resolution passed by Congress, has broad authority to take action in response to the attacks on 9/11. That's the premise here, guys. Now, it goes on to say down here that whether or not they're connected specifically to the organizations or not to support them is irrelevant. The point is connected to 9/11. Now, this is mission creep. We've been showing this for years. This is why they pretend they can move into any other country, because they just go, well, ISIS is there. Even though they weren't even connected to the conversation of 9/11, we understand where this really ties back to. So understand that this is a very flimsy argument, even then, by the way, as any constitutionalist was telling you at the time. But now we're recognizing that they're just continuing to extend this out forever. And like we keep telling you, if you give them more power, they never give it back, as you're seeing here. And ask yourself why these people that are the rebels are suddenly like screening the argument for why the government should have like unilateral power to kill people wherever they want. Sure fighting that deep state, aren't you? Now, Glenn Greenwald, highlighting the same tweet, says, a political movement can spend a decade demanding no more wars in the Middle East, so resources can be used at home instead of Americans. His point is that's what the Republicans have been saying right up until now. But the minute you show them a video of 30 Arabs blown up in a dubiously claim they're terrorists, many will say, hell yeah, kill more. Now, I'd like to believe that's the ignorant people that were never on any side of truth, that are just the team sport politics. I hope I'm right, because it's becoming hard not to see how many people seem to be at least not calling it out when they should. Now, I forget why I had this included. I feel like this was for a different conversation, but I'll move this down. I'm sure it'll pop up somewhere, the Trump point about anti-Semitism. But to get into the overlap of what Israel is doing. Now, recognize what we're talking about here, right? We're the ongoing execution of people on the ground all around the world under the guise of fighting terrorism, when all you're really doing is murdering people that speak out against what you're doing. The sad reality here, guys, is Israel is openly committing some of the most heinous acts I've ever seen. Not even just in Gaza, right? In Syria, in Lebanon, all over the world. And yet your government doesn't care. It continues to pull punches. It continues to support them to the point to where you have to, as I've said many times, ask yourself, how is it possible? They are either on this agenda to the point to where they are, diehard Zionists, which we know that's the case in some of these people, which means they're not America first, or they're compromised, threatened, blackmailed. Also certainly possible. The point is, you just have to acknowledge that this is counterintuitive to their stated agenda. So that's the only two things that make sense to me. Ask yourself what you think makes sense. But so highlighting what we just talked about, or rather overlapping it with what we're seeing them do on the ground. And this is an extension of the same story we just talked about. This one, or that we had recently talked about, and that was the medics being killed in the ambulance. Now, remember, we talked about that kind of right when it was happening. It's developed quite a bit since then. If you haven't seen it, this is a horrifying story. White House says, and this is now the White House's claim. Now, to give you a quick backup, there was an ambulance, 15 medics that were killed. Israel executed all of them, then tried to bury the ambulance to hide what they did. And then as they were trying to get to help them, they killed those people too, and then buried all of it. And now they've dug up the bodies that were there. I mean, this has come out left and right. I mean, and they lied about whether once it came out and they couldn't hide it, They said, oh, well, their lights were off and we couldn't see. We weren't sure. It's been definitively proven that the lights were on. And so then they go, well, we were wrong, but here's a new excuse. I mean, how many times can you literally see them lie to your face? Then they go, but never mind, this one now. It's incredible. And it's not even something to laugh about. We're talking about people's lives here. But here's the White House. As we have all this in front of us, this is from today. White House says Hamas, quote, entirely responsible for Israeli execution of Palestinian medics. Now, the White House is entirely responsible. That's Hamas. Anti-war is correctly framing this for Israel executing medics. That's the reality of this, which has been proven. The Trump administration has doubled down on its position that Hamas is to blame for Israeli troops executing 15 Palestinian medical workers in Gaza, even after a video showed that the Israeli military was lying about the incident. And I'll show you the clip. The IDF initially claimed that forces opened fire on vehicles that were advancing, quote, suspiciously and had no headlights or flashing emergency lights. Patently false. But a video recorded by one of the executed paramedics and their phones showed the ambulances that were driving and had emergency lights on when they opened fire. And he was, sadly, it's heartbreaking. He literally is on the phone recorded saying, forgive me, mother. This is the path I chose to help people. It hits home for me more than you think. And it says the Israeli soldiers tried to cover up the crime by burying the 15 medics and their ambulances in a shallow grave. The IDF has since changed its story, acknowledging the lights were flashing and that they opened fire on unarmed men, but now claiming 6 of them were linked to Hamas while offering no evidence. I mean, how do we even how is that not laughing in their, okay, they come up and they say, we opened fire because they had no lights on and we were worried about it. Then you get proven that's not true and they go, well, no, they were on, but now we thought they were Hamas then. Well, why wouldn't you have said that first? I mean, this is just embarrassing. This is like dealing with a kindergartner who stole cookies and you can see it all over their face. They're like, no, it's just like embarrassing to see them blatantly lying. And then you got the White House standing up and going, we agree. It wasn't them. This is my point that I bump up almost every show now. We need to acknowledge that we do not influence the power structure, guys. They do not care what you think. I don't know how else to frame that. It's obvious to me that we don't even affect their decision-making process if we can literally see them lying so blatantly and almost the entire country wants this to stop and they just keep doing it anyway. There's very prominent people today, like Jeffrey Sachs, for example, Phil Gerard. There's plenty of them. They're saying Israel is completely controlling the U.S. government. That's pretty obvious to me right now. Now it says, despite the clear evidence of a war crime, the U.S. is still backing the IDF's conduct. It says Hamas uses ambulance and more broadly human shields for terrorism. Can you believe they're still pushing this argument, despite the fact that not a single example of them using human shields has ever been shown since October 7th at the very least, let alone before that Robert proved. The UN has tried to prove it more than once, has never been able to prove it. Now, that's not to say they don't. I would find it hard to believe that's not happened. Interestingly, on the other side of it, you can see 8 examples just since October 7th. I mean, like on mainstream coverage from The Guardian, for example, of Israel being caught using human shields. And then they even have a new policy. They call it mosquito procedure, not the neighbor procedure. That was one of them. They have another one. This has been covered by Haaretz, corporate media. And yet we still can't have an honest conversation about this. This is my point, guys. That's cartoonishly bad. That's in your face and everybody sees it. And we just pretend like it's not the reality. How do you deal with that? How do you engage with that? Now, I could play that clip again about human shields. I mean, the point is, in case you haven't seen it, I'll play just a second of it, that it's transparent. The evidence goes back a very, very long way. 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. Defense for Children International, an international human rights group. Israel forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. That's 2023. Now, that clip goes on, guys, for the podcast. That's a clip from, 6 months ago. I made that clip from a show where I go over 8 different examples from Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all of them. And this is before October 7th, guys, well before October 7th. Just since then, and I'll actually grab that since it gives you the picture here. This is the show where I got that clip from. And it's just entitled The Open Secret of Israel's Use of Human Shields. I've done a similar show, by the way, called The Open Secret of Israel's Use of Organ Harvesting. Also very public. Incredible we don't talk about it. But this is not even that old, guys. This kid was literally tied with a belt to the front of their car. We saw the example of the guy on the front of their hood in the middle of summer, where it turned out his skin literally melted off on the top of the hood, but they tied him to the front of the Jeep that was running. I mean, it's just grotesque. It needs to make you think about who it is that we're dealing with, whether Biden or Trump, guys, because they're the damn same thing here. Now, it says, before the video came out, State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce was asked about the executions and also said that Hamas was to blame. Every single thing that happened in Gaza, she says, is happening because of Hamas. Every single dynamic. Okay, so when you execute children with nobody around, that's Hamas. That's what she's saying, because they started it. Sounds like we're in kindergarten. Now, Zionism Observer also makes a great point with this, and it's very public. Israel does this so regularly that they've even created a category for it on their video archival project, Ambulance Graveyard. Now, the links are down here. This is Zionism Observer. I mean, look at the categories, guys. They've got abducting bodies, airdrop. These are sourced videos, articles. Read it for yourself. The point is that we've seen this at Al-Shifa. We've seen this, I mean, from my memory, at least 2 different times where we've seen these massive ambulances be bombed, killed, shot, or rather people inside it killed and then buried. We saw the major example. I mean, there's an example where you can see, and I think they might even, it's called Ambulance Graveyard, because you can see some of these shots where, like, look in this video right here, where you've got like so many ambulances they bombed, they just kind of scooped them to the side and piled them all in a graveyard. Just like they did with all the cars from October 7th and then pretended Hamas did it, even though they didn't have the munitions to do it. That's how common it is. Now, here is them blatantly lying to you. And we act like that's not clearly obvious as they've now changed their story. But here he was yesterday, straight up lying to you.
The IDF did not randomly attack an ambulance. Last Sunday, several uncoordinated vehicles were identified advancing suspiciously toward IDF troops without headlights or emergency signals. IDF troops then...
For the podcast, you can literally see juxtaposed next to it all of the different shots of their headlights, their blinkers, and also recognize that they didn't, the way he described it, like they somehow came up on them. That's not how this worked out, guys. These people were tracked and hunted down and executed right in front of everybody. And the point is that they were very clearly showing what they were. And let's also be clear about one other point they don't mention here. Whether it's the Red Cross or the rest of them, the UNRWA or any of them, guys. I mean, maybe UNRWA is different today because of how crazy that focus is, but they overlap. They speak to the IDF. They say, look, we're going in this area. We are going to be delivering. We're going to be bringing hurt people. We're going to go to the hospital. And they go, okay, confirm. We know that you're, because in most war zones where there's not a Zionist genocider going on, that they're supposed to be relaying information to the different forces so they can recognize, okay, you're in a convoy that we shouldn't bomb. These are ambulances or whatever, school children. So they do that. So they're aware that they're going and what their purpose is, and they go after them anyway. That's important to understand.
And open fire at suspected vehicles. Following an initial assessment, it was determined that the forces had eliminated a Hamas military terrorist, Mohammed Amin Ibrahim Shubaki, who took part in the October 7 massacre, along with 8 other terrorists from Hamas.
Just so you understand, that's not true, guys. These people were medics. They've already. I'm going to show you the clip of them digging up their bodies. Like this is just desperate lies, as far as I can tell. My personal opinion, it seems like this guy is uncomfortable reading this. I think they're all very concerned about how they may very well end up in some kind of a jail cell. I mean, realize Netanyahu is on the precipice. I mean, it's not even just October 7th or anything around this. He has been about to go to prison for years now. He's got like 4 different indictments. Most of this country, including his own government, absolutely despise him. That you just need to, if you don't know that, if you think look it up, read Israeli media, it's very prominent. So what's crazy to me is I think they're all very aware that this is not going their direction. And I think this guy just gets trotted out to be the one so he can be scapegoated, I think. Just my personal opinion. You tell me what you think. I think the way he's reading this is kind of like, I don't want to be here.
The Islamic Jihad. So this is what I...
Hold on, he mentioned Islamic Jihad. I want to hear what he says.
From Hamas and the Islamic Jihad.
Oh, that is interesting. I always think this is a point to make. Remember in the beginning, it was Hamas. That was the only thing they mentioned. It was Hamas, because they wanted to make it simple. Eventually, I made the point that, well, at some point, even if they just got rid of all Hamas, well, remember, Islamic Jihad is way bigger than Hamas. It's a much bigger organization, like twice I don't know exactly. I think it was 3 times as big, Robert said. So what happens if they go after Hamas and they remove them and then they're just going to be like, we're done? Well, no, there's other groups, more than even just Islamic Jihad. So my point was always that this was just a narrative to get them to the step of, well, they would just go, well, now we have to get that group because they're just as problematic. So my point is they evolved it out to start including both of them because that's the plan. Like I said, it was.
So this is what I can tell you about this incident.
If you see anybody advocating for Israel on the TV or radio, one of their repellent spokespeople say, then they will be lying, because that's what they do. They lie and 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 they lie. And they lie, 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 and they lie.
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures. I've been in the government too long to know that the Israelis are patent liars. In their intelligence community, in their propaganda community, certainly, and in their leadership, they are inveterate liars. Let me say that again. They are liars.
So clearly, and this suppressed news just highlights this as saying this perfectly sums up the 17 months of Israeli crimes. Lies used to cover them up. I mean, it's just every single time it's as simple as that. You can literally see them evolve the story to whatever meets the expectation of the claim of the day. Robert covered this very well during the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, an American journalist. And they lied about, oh, it was the Hamas that shot her. Oh, never mind. It was a ricocheted bullet. It was an accident. Oh, never mind. They thought she was Hamas. Oh, never mind. We point blank killed her, but it was an accident. Every day the narrative shifted and the evidence came out. Nobody was held accountable. Not even the U.S. government didn't care they killed an American. And guess what? That happened again. More than once has happened. We'll talk about it in a second. Now, in regard to that again, Loki simply highlights, oh, this is how BBC News covers it. Israel admits mistakes over medics killing in Gaza. Admits mistakes. Lies is the reality of that. You can see the pictures with their headlights and everything else on. They're just simply lying. Now, here's drop site news. The Fox, and this is interesting, actually. I'm not sure how to place this. I mean, just because people are in the corporate media does not always mean that they're exactly what you think they are. But just like always, question everything. And especially when it comes to corporate media. As usual, I think, I guess my opinion would usually be that if they're in that field, they're there for a reason. But I see it as opportunism. Either way, opportunists are what I'm arguing we should be leaning into in the sense of, highlight the work. Don't pretend you can trust them. But if people start calling out Israel, highlight it. All right. So this guy's from Fox News, and he has been consistently calling this out in Gaza. So my point is, it's worth saying he's doing good work on this topic. He's corporate media. Don't trust any of them, but recognize it. And so show other people in the field that there is a benefit to being honest about this. And so here's Trey Yinks, I think, from Fox News, reports on the mass graves of paramedics in Rafah, where Palestinian Red Cross workers were recovered. And this is them digging their bodies out.
Medics from the Palestine Red Crescent dig through the earth of southern Gaza. They're recovering the bodies of their colleagues killed by Israeli forces. On March 23rd, first responders were dispatched to this area of Rafah. When they arrived, Israeli soldiers opened fire.
Health workers should never be a target, and yet we're here today digging up a mass grave of first responders and paramedics.
On March 31st, the IDF provided a statement to Fox News saying, quote, several vehicles were identified advancing suspiciously toward IDF troops without headlights or emergency signals. Video released 5 days later by the Palestine Red Crescent directly contradicts that statement. The IDF also claimed in the initial findings that 9 out of the 15 medics were operatives in Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Asked multiple times for evidence to support that claim, none was provided. Funerals were held late last week for those killed by Israeli bullets. Families mourning the dead, mothers trying to make sense of the senseless. He went to save the martyrs and injured, and we've been waiting for him for a week. We were told that he was either martyred or injured, but I realized that they had killed them from the very first moment. They had killed them and buried them underground. as bodies of these medics rest inside white plastic bags with a photo attached. The face of Rifat Radwan stands out, the man who recorded his final moments with a final message. Forgive me, Mother. This is the path I chose, to help people, he said.
That one really hits home for me. I mean, I struggle with this personally. Where, I'm pretty close with my family. And I know that it's difficult for some of them to worry about what, and obviously I'm not even remotely trying to compare what they're doing over there to what I'm doing. But nonetheless, the point is that, the doing things that put yourself in somewhat in harm's way, it's difficult to be, like family members that worry about the safety of them. And so just to recognize that he's saying that, putting his heart out there and saying simply that, forgive me, I'm doing this because I care. It's emotional, man. And I think we need to recognize how many people are out there literally putting their lives on the line for you, wherever you are in the world. And sadly enough, so many people in this country have been convinced that those people are somehow terrorists. Now, here is the article from the Times of Israel. IDF acknowledges incorrectly claiming that Gaza ambulances didn't have emergency lights on. So Brian Grimm just simply says, it's helpful when people out themselves as monsters. He said, here is one propagandist claiming that after Israel killed 15 medics, they instantly identified some of them as terrorists. Raises a few questions. Well, here's what he's saying first. He's saying reports that new findings from the IDF's investigation into the killing of 15 aid workers of particular note. The IDF has also found that at least 6 of them, 15 slain medics, were immediately identified as Hamas operatives. So I guess we just ignored the other 8 that aren't. Just murder 8 people. Well, yeah, apparently that's been the acceptable reality in Gaza this whole time. That as long as they think they find one bad guy, they can kill whoever they want. Even though that's never been the reality and is a war crime, no matter how you spin it. It's called collective punishment at the very least, but there's plenty more around that. But as he simply says, recognize when people show you who they are, believe them. And he says, here's one propagandist claiming that after Israel killed 15, that they just somehow immediately identified them as terrorists. How exactly does that work? He goes, raises a few questions. How stupid do you think we are? Number 2, generally, is shooting and killing the medics first and only later asking questions a legitimate approach to medical workers? Think about how crazy that is. What is wrong with you? Number 3, there's so many people out there that are, whatever you think about individuals and different platforms, when you can just, calling it out, just right now, this is such a contentious topic, but it's important to just be like, this is ridiculous. Just because you want to agree with the topic or pretend that somehow these people are inherently bad. It's the same conversation we're going to get into in a second about the deportations. I don't care if you think everything they're claiming is true. There is still a reality of due process for these people, and they just skip right over it and give you the narrative they think is going to convince you that you should ignore it. Now, WikiLeaks highlights this in another topic. 2 more journalists were killed in an airstrike in Gaza. This was on the 6th. One burned alive in a press tent outside. Now, this is disgustingly, this is a very, very public conversation. This has been documented. This is a journalist who was in a tent who was burned alive because they bombed this area, which happens like every single day in Gaza. And it says the Palestinian journalists were, I don't want to try to pronounce their names and in concern, worried that I might mispronounce them. But the point is they were burned alive on video inside the press tent. 9 other journalists were injured in the attack. Israel's war on Gaza has killed 232 journalists. Now, that is unprecedented, guys, especially in the time frame we're talking about. And that doesn't matter, apparently, making it the deadliest conflict for media workers ever recorded, according to a report by the Watson Institute for the International and Public Affairs Costs of War Project. Gaza is now confirmed as the deadliest zone for journalists in 200 years. I mean, I don't even know how you could frame it as not as ever. Because quite frankly, 200 years ago, what we call this field is not the same thing. I mean, it's somewhat similar, but the point is that what we're dealing with today is a unique circumstance. That's just incredible. 232 journalists. Remember in the beginning where it was, every time something like this happened, it was like there was a narrative, an explanation. Nobody even cares now. They just fall into the background. It says press advocacy groups such as Reporters Without Borders and the Committee to Protect Journalists have repeatedly condemned the deliberate targeting of journalists by Israeli forces. But I guess that just makes them Hamas, right? Here, it's in Hebrew, but this clip that you can listen to if you want, this is what they're saying. And Furqan highlights this as Nazis of 2025, dehumanizing innocence. He says, these are the reporters. Remember, the same corporate media Israeli reporters that were openly debating why it was okay to rape people in your prison custody because, they're terrorists or whatever the narrative is, even though the ones they're talking about were provably not terrorists. That's something that happened. Understand how real that is. To openly debate and argue in favor of war crimes, quite frankly. But it says, and this is another report, quote, Gaza is a cage inside a zoo. But totally not an open-air prison, though, guys. Gaza is a cage inside a zoo, they say. Continuing, it says, quote, a human being who grows up in a cage inside a zoo, in the end, behaves like a human animal. The evacuation of the Gaza Strip is the right and moral thing to do. Don't you love using your own inhumane genocidal acts as the justification for helping people that you're trying to kill? Lovely. But overall, guys, think about what they just said right there. You're literal. So even if you think that's even accurate, the argument is we did this to them. Therefore, it's moral for us to. It's so insane. The level of broken mental gymnastics you're seeing for people like this. These are Zionists, guys. And understand there is a big growing movement of people in Israel who are screaming about how this is wrong, not just displacing them, but Zionism in general. Orthodox Jewish communities who are protesting what they're doing, getting beat up by the IDF. It happens every day. Now, this I just thought was absolutely, I had to make sure, I was wondering whether this was somehow like the old clip at a different angle. Glenn Greenwald shared this today. Now, his caption tweet says, Israel has repeatedly killed Americans in the West Bank. I'm going to get into this in a second. They've recently just killed an American citizen, a 14-year-old American in Israel. Now, we'll come to that. But he says, when I said below that one day after Israel murdered a 14-year-old American in the West Bank, Trump would hold Netanyahu's chair for him like a waiter, I was speaking metaphorically because he did it the last time. But yes, guys, he did it again. Now, like I said last time, I find this to be, it matters in a way. It's a gesture that it's symbolic. But in the larger sense of things, I find it to be largely irrelevant to whether or not, but it's worth considering. The whole point being that somehow this therefore proves that he's, beholden to this man. Let's be clear. You don't need him pulling out his chair to be able to prove he's beholden to this man. That's the important thing. The chair is just an accessory to that conversation. It's a tangential point to the provable amount of money being stuffed in Trump's pockets coming from Israel. But the bottom line is he saw the conversation last time. He saw what his own people were saying about when he did that, and he does it again. It's right here for the podcast. Watch the video. At the very least, pushes his chair in for him, which again, I'm not even saying is the huge deal, but I think it's fascinating to think about. Even Glenn Greenwald felt it was necessary to call out. So bringing this into Israel and what he was referencing, in case you missed it, Israel just shot and killed a 14-year-old U.S. citizen. This was yesterday, okay? And yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu rolls up to the United States. And guess what? They gave him the literal red carpet treatment. Now, you may not be able to see that because for some strange reason, Twitter just doesn't let you see this image anymore, even though I was able to save the image from when I first opened this earlier. Now, I'm not saying this is a conspiracy. Who knows? Maybe it's just one of those weird glitches that seem to be in the favor of Israel on this platform. But what I think is interesting is that you can't see it. Here it is, though. The literal red carpet treatment for Netanyahu, a war criminal who is, the ICC, the ICJ, most countries in the world, most honest people that have morals are all calling for this man to be arrested. Legally from the international community, he is required to be arrested by people who are part of this community. And they don't care. They just straight up don't care. And they not only don't care, they literally give him the red carpet treatment while he's at that moment murdering people in Gaza. It's just absolutely mind-blowing to me. But I think it's worth noting that this image just doesn't really show up. Now, the point is an American citizen. Now, it's important to understand that this is not the first time. And an American citizen in the context of what we're talking about is no more or less important than any other human being killed. But it is important for the conversation of how completely beholden your U.S. government is to a foreign government to the point to where they don't even speak up when an American is killed, let alone about the other Americans that were trapped in Palestine and Gaza from October 7th forward. All they ever focused on were the Israeli Americans that were taken, which all of them should matter. None of them deserve to be suffering in the situation. So what's funny is that they only seem to care about one side of that. That's not an opinion. That's objective reality. Sure sounds like the opposite of America first to me. But Glenn, as I said, Israel's repeatedly killed Americans in the West Bank. They have. They killed a U.S. journalist and first denied it. Then video proved they did, so they admitted it. We just talked about that. And that's this one. I'll grab it for you. And Robert wrote a couple articles on this. This one was specifically the one that's important. The Israel covered up the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh with U.S. help. The U.S. government helped cover up the murder of an American journalist in Israel because Netanyahu said. It's really as simple as that, guys. It's not. This is an old story. You could look this up. It's provable. But as he said as well, they admitted it. They did. Now they just shot a 14-year-old American. Today, Trump will hold Netanyahu's chair again. And he was right. He literally did that. Trey here, showing you on video. An American citizen was shot and killed by Israeli snipers overnight in the West Bank. That's a Fox News correspondent, guys. This is not even being disputed. Here he is. And there's now 4 Palestinian children, by the way, all holding American citizenship. This is Ilhab Hassan reports, were shot by Israeli settlers and soldiers in the village of Trumusaya. One of them was killed and the other 3 were injured. According to witnesses, the Israeli settler opened fire first, followed by Israeli soldiers who arrived and began shooting at these children as well. This is a photo of adolescents, more accurate, but under 18. It was 14. So, I mean, it's, you guys can make your distinction on what you think is a child who was shot and killed. From a legal sense, that's considered a child, but realize that that's adolescent. Still matters, guys, regardless. It's human life. And what's crazy to me is that the idea that you can diminish between these, like there's a point in which you can argue that there's a dishonest way to frame somebody as an American who might just have citizenship, who doesn't live in the United States or was only recently given so for other reasons, intelligence connected kind of things. I've covered those in the past around Iraq, for example, where they claim an American was killed after a bombing when it turned out to be somebody who is, I argue, was intelligent that simply had the citizenship. Doesn't change the fact that they are still technically an American. So the point in this case is this person being killed by Israel in principle is no different than any other American being killed. Same point as everything else, guys. Now ask yourself why your government hasn't said a word about that. Where are they? Do they not care when Americans get killed by their chief ally? And E.C. Brand says someone who has U.S. citizenship is an American. They executed an American teenager. In this video, you can watch of him. I mean, it's graphic. I don't necessarily have to show it. Now, what's important, guys, is the Lemkin Institute. Remember when Netanyahu, right in the beginning, tried to nod to the Lemkin Institute as if or even reference Lemkin in like a quote? And then the point is, this is a genocide. It's Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention. That's what it's called. Now, it says the Lemkin Institute. This is from somebody. This is a international relations, global development president of Independent Jewish Voices, speaking out about this, saying the Lemkin Institute, named after Polish Jewish intellectual Raphael Lemkin, who defined, quote, genocide after witnessing the atrocities of the Nazi Holocaust, issued this statement against Israel's complicity in Gaza's genocide. Every single one of he says us, meaning people, I don't know if it means Jews or Israelis, should be ashamed. Here's what the Lemkin Institute says. The Lemkin Institute condemns Israel, Europe, Canada, and the United States for perpetrating genocide in Gaza. It is a moral wrong that should haunt these countries for eternity. How do you ignore stuff like that? Literally an institute built on this is on the idea of genocide prevention, a group that Netanyahu has pointed to, a group that is literally named after a Polish Jewish intellectual after calling out the Nazi Holocaust. They're literally telling you what they're doing is the same thing and everyone should call it out. And we can't wrap our minds around that. At least the people I'm trying to reach in this conversation. Guys, it's right in front of you. Here's Haaretz. Trump and his it says Trump and his Mideast envoy, Steve Witkoff, made a big miscalculation. Now hear this, guys, by not pressuring Netanyahu to respect the ceasefire, the agreement that he signed himself. Yeah, just like we're all telling you. They signed. It was supposed to continue. Israel deviated. Blamed them like they always do. Anyone with a brain and an objectivity and honesty is very aware of how this has been going every time. Blinken continued to lie, and now we see the new ones continue to lie. It's the same thing. All I'm trying to show you here is that this is a dishonest element, and your government is either taken by it or part of it. Now, on top of all of that, yes, they still send them more money. All the promises kept, right, guys? Ukraine stopped, right? No, that's still going. They're still funding that. Oh, what the war on Gaza? That's been done, right? No, they've continued to fund that too. Plenty of things, right? This is 15 senators on the 4th had voted against $8.8 billion to Israel. More on top of everything else. I mean, we're like I don't even know anymore. I have to look back and keep the running tally. Tens of billions of dollars flooding into Israel's hands on top of the $3.8 billion a year we give them already. Now, the U.S. Senate overwhelmingly, apparently, and this was I was just trying to get like the latest update from this today, has apparently overwhelmingly rejected a bid to block those arms sales. Surprise, surprise. The completely compromised Congress voted to not stop those funds. Despite that being a crime internationally and domestically in every possible way, the majority of the Senate voted to not stop those funds. Now, I don't know whether Bernie or the rest of them actually cared to stop it, or they just wanted to pretend they did. Either way, it's not hard to see that almost everyone left and right will blindly support Israel at the expense of Americans everywhere you look. As Sal Diagras points out, 3 a.m. and you and the boys just sent $28 billion to Israel, and you can see Kamala and Trump and Biden and I mean everyone, Vance and Elon and Obama drinking beer. That's the meme anyway. The point is that they're all on the same side, guys. Now, Philip Giraldi, where I got this image from, by the way, and this is real. This is a shot in Israel. Trump, make Israel great again. They clearly know what's going on. And Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University has described the current Donald Trump regime as, quote, Israel first administration packed with Zionists at all levels. Guys, it's an objective reality. They tell you that. It's amazing that we can have to debate these things. The State Department Press Secretary Tammy Bruce has already said that, quote, anyone who tries to touch Israel will wind up in hell, otherwise known as El Salvador, where they're sending people to concentration camps. That's what they're referencing, guys. Anyone who tries. Well, to reference back to the point about the Constitution and due process, the same thing. Any person, that means illegal immigrants too, because that's the reality of constitutional rights. It applies inherently, inalienable rights to anybody in this country in regard to the 5th and 14th Amendment and due process. That's a fact. Reno versus Flores, even Scalia said himself that it is important, especially in deportation cases. The point here is when he says when Tammy Bruce says anyone who tries to touch Israel will wind up in hell, pretty sure you can factor in that means anyone. And we'll get to that. We're going to end on that point again because I showed you in the beginning. He said it again. Trump has said again the idea of sending Americans to a foreign prison. There is literally no precedent. There's no legal reality. There's no legal reality for what they're doing right now. That's why it's concerning. But in regard to a few more points over Israel, let's not forget what's going on in Syria. That hasn't stopped either. I recommend either Eva Bartlett or Vanessa Beeley's coverage on this because they're more immersed in that than anybody. I mean, it's just so grotesque how clearly that is a problem that almost seems to be it's not even part of the conversation anymore. So they basically funded, no, I shouldn't even say that. They literally funded terrorists in Idlib and all the rest around the conversation, moderate rebels and all that, left and right administrations. Al-Qaeda becomes al-Nusra, al-Nusra becomes Hayat al-Sham, and they act like you don't know that. And then they protect them many times throughout the process. And then finally, whatever the real outcome was, got us out of the way. And then boom, all the terrorists that they were fighting become the leadership of Syria. On a dime. Like they literally shave his beard, take away the bounty and go, he's our guy now, even though he always was, is the point. I don't know how that's not jarring for people. I think it is. That's my point. I think we're all being fed this false picture of what the majority is as we all see what's going on. Don't worry. Technocracy is coming soon. They'll put you all back to sleep. That's the plan. Israeli troops detain civilians, block roads as they move deeper into Syria. Gee, who didn't see that coming? Well, anybody watching the show already saw it coming, seeing as how day one, Israel floods into Syria, starts taking over areas, starts building bases, starts naming new areas for settlements. But none of that's real if you listen to the corporate media or the mainstream alternative media. Guys, it's literally U.S. government fighting wars for Syria's benefit on the surface. And now they're detaining civilians, blocking roads, moving deeper in because this is the Greater Israel Project. Guys, it's very, very clear. On top of that, in regard to the other side of this, you have the Iran conversation. Well, the U.S. has deployed a second THAAD missile system to Israel amid Iran tensions. The tensions they're manufacturing for the very benefit of what we're dealing with here. Problem, reaction, solution, sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. The point is, guys, this is continuing. Propaganda & Co. had a great clip showing you that this is already in the works, guys. They already have plans laid out. It's not hard to see. Now, whether that's a feigned threat, I don't think so, but it's up for you to decide. The reality is, even these, as we've seen already, just since Trump's second administration, even the floating of an idea can have repercussions. They are pushing this into reality. Tucker Carlson, of course, chimes in and says, whatever you think of tariffs, which I didn't get into today. I was going to make some points around that. I mean, it's the same point. Anybody with a brain already knows what they're doing is going to be catastrophic. I mean, even if you get everyone to fall and get a cave to your bullying tactics, which I don't know why anybody would respect that, that is not that will not create a positive outcome in the long run. It never does. It's economic warfare, and it almost always leads to real warfare. That's historically reality. But regardless, I mean, one quick note, the whole push on China, apparently just before I went live, China pulled back and said, okay, we'll bow to what you said. So they're going to, and rightly so. Maybe he's right. Maybe you think he's on the right of it. Maybe he is. The bottom line is, it is not the way to conduct international engagements or international cooperation, or in any context, working with other countries. He's doing this with allies. Anyway, I'll go into that in a future show, I'm sure, because the tariff thing doesn't seem to go away. But guys, we know this. Tariffs are taxes on you. The people that, if anybody benefits from this, it will be the upper echelon. And we forgot how trickle down economics, bragging doesn't work, guys. It just doesn't work. The powerful will never go, here's your cut. It's not how that works out, even by default. But the point is, whatever you think of tariffs, it's clear, this is Tucker Carlson's tweet, it's clear now that the worst possible time for the United States to participate in a military strike on Iran, or ever for that matter. And it says, we can't afford it though, or we can't afford it, period. It says thousands of Americans would die. We'd lose the war that follows. Nothing would be more destructive to our country. I agree. And it says, and that we're closer than ever, thanks to the unrelenting pressure from neocons. This is suicidal. Anyone advocating for conflict with Iran is not an ally of the United States, but an enemy. Okay, here's what's so fascinating to me. I mean, you can't read this and not think that he just called Trump an enemy of the country. Trump is actively promoting the idea of going to war with Iran. So is Vance, and so is the rest of them. But of course, like all the rest of these people making these points, you're never going to see him go, Trump isn't doing the right thing. He has to go, it's all the neocons that must be tricking him. I mean, it's just so lazy. Can't you guys have the gumption, the constitution to be like, that guy is doing the wrong thing, but I still support him. Fine, make the point. But it's like going out of their way to make sure we don't criticize RFK Jr. or Trump because they're on our side, as you're literally saying the thing they're doing is an enemy of the country. How do people not see through this stuff? I just don't get it. The bottom line, yes, going to war with Iran would be catastrophic for this country. It always has been. Honestly, frankly, I don't think this country would even win something like that. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't understand the dynamic. I think it's obvious historically that we've seen that this is not, I mean, whether it's all the rest of the countries getting involved, we've already kind of seen how this plays out with what they're doing in Gaza. But the bottom line is, this is not in anybody's interest other than Israel. There's nothing that benefits this country by doing any of this other than to do it for Israel. Maybe Tucker sees it. He's not saying that though. But either way, I'm glad he's at least pushing back on that, but I get the sense this is about trying to justify what's about to be a turn because then nobody's buying the direction. That's the sense I get. And that ultimately it's about blaming somebody else other than Trump because that's going to continue. But of course, I could be wrong. Now, in case you need any more evidence to highlight the reality that yes, Zionism and Israel have been actively manipulating this country, and Tucker and the rest of them have to know that, or they're hiding it, or they're part of it. I don't know how you can miss how obvious this is with what they're pointing to. Here is yet another clip I've shown before. Netanyahu has been maliciously influencing the U.S. government for decades, all while pushing for Americans to die for Zionist agendas. None of these wars have been in the interest of Americans.
If you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how do it...
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The answer is categorically yes. The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. But a third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. So you have here now three nations.
All stand together to stop Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror. I know that no matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, standing ovation. For the podcast, you really got to see his face in this. And of course, Alan McLeod points out, this cartoon is almost 20 years old, but it could have been published today. And it shows a picture of the Earth. The Earth is holding up a piece of paper that says Israel's crimes against Palestinians. And you've got a person with a Star of David, a Zionist symbol, not a Jewish symbol, who is rolling out tape around the Earth's mouth that says anti-Semitism. This has been going on for as far back as you can look, guys. And this is why you have people in the IDF or Holocaust academics who have spoken up about this stuff, who are actively telling you this government uses these claims to hide its crimes. That doesn't have to mean that that there's not relevance or importance to other parts of the conversation, or that there are very clear aspects of anti-Semitism or racism. Obviously, it is to highlight that regardless of those things existing, that this is also happening. It's very simple. Goes back a long way. Now, to finish with and we got a little bit more to cover, but to finish in general, we're going to talk about the overlapping conversation of the weaponized deportation. Now, I mean, it's what this ultimately is, as far as I can see. I mean, it's a crime. The ongoing lack of acknowledgement of our constitutional rights, the removal of them, if you look at it that way, even though it's not possible, and how clearly this is setting the table for something that's coming next. But in the weaponized idea of this, clearly this is suppressing speech. People are afraid to speak up. So this started, at least in this kind of current part of it, with Mohammed Khalil. Now, I want to give you an update on where he is, because I want to make sure we knew what was going on there. But just starting, it's March 13th, we covered this. Now, remember, the case was just Mohammed. Okay, he was here legally in the country, which I think is very relevant, right? He was in the country legally. He had no criminal record. They have still, to this point, never charged him with a crime. They're not even claiming he committed a crime. So the very first point this started at, because don't forget, Batar US, a Zionist, like seriously, a rabid organization who's publicly calling for the blood of children. I mean, like explicitly, literally saying we want more blood in regard to the children list of under zero that was posted on Twitter. These are the people that are going after Normal Finkelstein and saying, here's a pager, who are the ones that literally gave the name of Khalil to Bondi, Rubio, and Trump. Over and over and over across the week until finally they got him first. You just can't miss how clear that is. And so the point is that this guy was not a criminal. He was here legally. They never charged him with a crime. So this whole argument that, well, they're illegal immigrants, well, that's the second part of this we're going to talk about. But the first part was a very clear, massive deviation. And again, whatever you think about him, he obviously still has due process, like anybody else in this country. They can't just revoke. I think they were hoping we would just let that happen. It was at the table for them revoking anyone they wanted. Now people, hopefully, are becoming more aware that constitutional rights are not unique to simply U.S. citizens. That's not the reality. You can prove it. I mean, ask Grok if that makes you happier. It'll tell you point blank. But here, with Khalil, it set the tone. Now, what happened right after that, of course, was where they went into the conversation of El Salvador, Venezuela. And what's weird is it kind of combined these two things. One of them was more about protesters and Israel and Colombia. And this one went over to the idea of the border, gangs and MS-13 and Venezuelan, Tren de Aragua, all these different overlaps, which weren't really the same story, but weirdly enough, same solution. So the interesting point here is that this is how they're using this to build your support for this. But what did we find out? Well, that most of these people were, I literally, as far as I could tell at this point, none of them had anything other than subjective claims. If you have a tattoo and you're in the wrong place, the wrong skin color. Nobody, and look, I actually believe that's exactly what happened. And most of what we now show proves that. But there's still a few examples of somebody we don't know. I said in the beginning, it's probably likely that at least one of them or some of them are part of these gangs. But think about how crazy it is that they have yet to prove that, which pretty much shows you that they never even tried to prove that, which means they don't have the evidence, which they're just banking on the ongoing narrative to drive this thing. But the point is they send a bunch of people. Turns out the vast majority of them that we can prove have no criminal record. And here's my important point in this. Even if they were here illegally, even they do have due process rights, and that was a violation. But on top of that, we proved, and we'll show you again today, that at least, if I remember correctly, it was at least 10 of them were here legally, whether it was a visa, a green card, were seeking asylum, or had been given asylum. All of those things are legal realities, which they can't just, if you want to jump in and say, wait, you can't, you have to then present the evidence of why, due process, go to court. That's how this works, guys. That is the legal reality. If you don't like that, you can argue to change it. But what they're doing is illegal, whether you agree with it or not. So first, with Khalil, he was taken from New York by ICE on March 8th. Now, what it says is the agents were acting on orders from the State Department to revoke his visa, even though no evidence was presented, no due process, never happened. When the agents were informed, and this was so embarrassing, and we talked about this, when they were informed that he actually was a permanent resident, well, they said that would be taken instead. Did it show you how fly by the seat of their pants? Like they went after this guy because they were directed to go after this guy. I mean, how wild is that? They didn't even know what actual documentation he had. So I don't know how that in my mind completely shows you that this was directed by somebody else that said, take that guy. And they just went after him. Didn't even have the wherewithal to be like, let's build a case. They just grabbed him and got rid of him. And then even they were still saying visa well after, when no, he actually had a green card. That's very different. And it's wild to me. But it says that when the agents were informed that he was a lawful permanent resident, they said that will be revoked instead. And he was transported to La Salle Detention Center in Louisiana. Now, his arrest was a direct response, it says, of his active advocacy for Palestinian rights. He faces no criminal charges and has not been convicted of a crime. They're not even trying to pretend he committed a crime. They're literally telling you his ideology, his words, his thoughts are why he's being deported. That should be alarming for every American. But his lawyers have asked him to be released from the jail in Louisiana while he challenges the government's efforts. It says he's argued that I'm jumping quickly. It says he's a lawful permanent resident who was authorized in the United States to live and work in the country. The Trump administration argues that Khalil's challenge to this should be heard in Louisiana, where he now is detained. Now, why they do that? Because they feel that they have more influence in Louisiana, and most of these cases in these courts, especially in these areas, are it's like the courts in Israel for Palestinians. It's like a 90% in one direction. But it goes on to say where he is now detained and where any appeals would be heard by the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, the most conservative in the country. That's why. Khalil's lawyers have asked for him to be released from the jail while he challenges it, because guys, realize he's not a criminal. He has no criminal record. He's here legally. This is an allegation based on the idea that he's working with something that you can't prove. Why would you keep him in a jail cell if all you have is the argument that you think something? Like it's just not how this we're told it operates, but we know the reality, it's different. But it's saying to deport him, and it says in a separate case in immigration court, they argue that Trump's administration improperly targeted him for his political views. It's obvious. U.S. District Judge ordered the Trump administration not to deport him until a judicial review. So that's where we are. So he's literally being held in a Louisiana prison until they can just figure this out. That's not due process. That is not how this works. This is an abuse of power. It's very simple. Now, we also followed up on the first. Trump deportations revealed to be full of innocent people. And I made sure to emphasize this, and I still got pushback. Legal immigrants with no criminal record. Like I just said, very important. And we went through, this is an important one to watch. We went through a lot of these cases where you can straight up prove that they were here legally. Now I'm going to go over some more additional points to that. So that show right there was important to watch before, but I go into all this. And the reality is that we can prove visas, green cards, and the important overlap, guys. And this is something I really want you to hear before I go into all this. The way that they're playing this game, there are people that are coming to a crossing somewhere, not trying to sneak in, not jumping the fence, but walking up there and saying, I'm presenting myself because I want to seek asylum. Okay. So they take them into custody, and then they have to be set up a date and a hearing, assuming they check them and they're not criminals, right? And so that's where a lot of these people were, either in the process of doing so, which they then call illegal. I'm going to make a point about this for specifically Garcia, where they go, he was here illegally as the basis for why he should be removed, but he wasn't here illegally. In his own court documentation that has been confirmed, he went and presented himself so we could go through the process, and was in the process of seeking asylum. And he was the one that was the judge ordered before all of this that he would not be allowed to go back to El Salvador because he was at risk. They sent him anyway. And that's the guy right now we'll get to in a second that they're saying has to be returned. That's one of many. There's the gay barber guy who shouldn't be there. That's a terrifying story. Apparently he's suffering right now. None of these people are criminals, no criminal record. Everyone that we're going to mention were here legally, and some of them are currently rotting in a prison that seems they'll never be able to come away from. It's pretty terrifying. And so remember that. That we have these examples of people. Oh, and the point I was making is that they're playing that limbo where they come up and present themselves, and there's a period of time before they are even given a date to apply for asylum where they pretend they're illegal aliens. I mean, that's not the truth. I don't know why you would call yourself an illegal alien, or they would call them that, other than political manipulation when somebody's trying to go through the process. If you're filing a green card, does it make you an illegal alien until you get it? I think that's a manipulation. Now, if you want to pretend that's the case, at least make the distinction to say that people are going through the legal process and in the limbo are that. The problem is that people are hearing that and pretending they broke the law. Well, no, he didn't break the law. He tried to go through the legal process, and you abused that limbo to pretend he was a criminal and used false evidence to back it up. And we'll go over it again. It's insane how obvious this is. These people are, I think it's obvious that the Trump administration is aware that they are breaking the law, and they're going to double down. Why not? Because anything else is going to get you in trouble. Now, Jared Holt here this is not familiar with his work, but he posted this link from CBS. 60 Minutes, quote, could not find criminal records for 75% of the 238 men. Now, first point, guys, whether or not you think that every one of them were here illegally, which I can prove to you that at least many of them that I'm seeing that I can prove are not, which makes you then question whether maybe any of them weren't. But the point is we don't know because they never presented any evidence. So why would you assume in the favor of the government? That seems pretty historically unsmart. But my point is that even if you think they were all here illegally, how are you going to rationalize, one, sending people who are in this country to some foreign prison that they've never been to in a country they've never been to for people that are not criminals? Again, whether you think they snuck in this country or not, or they're abusing the limbo of some of them who are actually trying to do the right thing, the point is the same. That you don't. This is a terrifying prison with some of the worst people on the planet, and not only are Americans paying for you to send them there, paying for them to stay there, they don't deserve to be there. I mean, it's just so. This is human nature, guys. This is about whether you care about human life or not. And now it goes on to say, of the 22% of the records that the, quote, vast majority are for non-violent offenses, right? So the other group, most of them aren't even, they're, smoking weed or stealing things, non-violent crimes. Trump admins still insist that they're terrorists. That's the point. They're just calling them all terrorists, even though it appears right now that it seems like most of them, if not all of them, simply are not. Here's the article. And this one is specifically, and that's the guy right there. He's a barber, a gay barber, who was sent there. And the tattoos are like it's the nuance of this is important, but the idea of whether the tattoo point is important because you can prove that they're being wildly broad about it. A Bulls hat becomes, Michael Jordan was on the Bulls and Michael Jordan's 23 and 23 relates to that Venezuelan city. So therefore the Bulls hat is that he's a criminal. That they've done that. I'll show you the document. But this is the U.S. sent 238 migrants to Salvadorian mega prison. Documents indicate most have no apparent criminal record. Now it says they are now prisoners. Among them, a makeup artist, a soccer player, a food delivery driver. We talked about every one of these. Every one of them were here legally, being held in a place so harsh that El Salvador's justice minister once said the only way out is in a coffin. Now, it says Andre is a 31-year-old Venezuelan. He's a makeup artist. He's a gay man. He loves to do theater. He is part of a theater troupe in his hometown. It says he does not have a criminal record in the United States or Venezuela. He says he left his home country last year because he was targeted for being gay and his political views. Last May, Andre made the long trek based Darien Gap in Mexico, where he eventually got an appointment to seek asylum in the United States. Now, you can prove all this. I've gone over the documents, guys. So when he got the appointment for the asylum, as he presented himself to wherever he crossed, he then was in the legal process of trying to get asylum from a country that's been destroyed by the United States government. So there's very clear reasons to think that's the very least the United States government should take some responsibility for that. But it says at a legal border crossing near San Diego, he was taken into custody while his case was processed. So the bottom line, guys, is there's some countless examples like this where they're abusing the ignorance of the conversation. Now, here is Aaron Richland Melnick, who is the lawyer in regard to a lot of this immigration conversation. And he's been posting a lot of, again, whatever you think about him or his political views, you can prove what he's showing you. He gives you the court documents. He makes an objective point that you can verify for yourself. So if you ignore those things because you don't like him or where he comes from or his political views, then you're the dumb one in the conversation. It doesn't matter in the context of where, if you can prove the information, who says it. This is tonight we learned that it was indeed Andre, a gay man sent to El Salvador because of his mom and dad tattoos, who an American journalist saw sobbing as guards slapped him repeatedly. He's an innocent, and Trump sent him to the torture prison. Bring him back. Now, you can see this in a report that came out 60 Minutes. And we already basically highlighted this a second ago. And the point is, you can see in this breakdown of one of the people that has been identified by a family member is him being basically roughed up by these guards. And this is a very common thing we're hearing here, guys, that these people are abused. They're beat up. One of the guys that came from before all this, who spoke about what he dealt with in the prison, was telling you that they basically just, they beat him up. They tried to get him to confess to being a terrorist. Then they kicked him in a room with guards and other prisoners who then beat him up for days. This is a common understanding. It's a place where they have one small window, if any, of sunlight. They are outdoor labor, or excuse me, I forget it was outdoor. And I think I would imagine it's probably outdoor. The point is labor, hard labor. When you're inside, you're trapped inside no matter what, if you get out at all. And this is a place that the argument is you never leave. That if you ever get any kind of a hearing, it's hundreds of people in the same room with one TV screen and one judge. You realize if you're an innocent person, like most of them seem to be, who are sent there, the argument that you have any way to get out seems almost impossible. Assuming a judge, or without a judge saying that guy has to be sent back, which is what we'll talk about next. Even that, it seems the U.S. government is saying, sorry, we can't do anything about that, which should be insulting to all of us. Now, here's another example. This is another person that was sent there. And this is based on this. You could read it from CBS News. Photojournalists witnessed Venezuelan migrants arriving in El Salvador. And it says, the title was, they had no idea what was coming. Now, he says, we sent this, I hate the way they frame that. The U.S. government sent this man to rot in a prison in El Salvador because he had tattoos that said mom and dad with little crowns over them. He grew up in a town famous for the Three Kings Day pageant, which, you guessed it, features crowns. That's how subjective this becomes. Now, this one, we're going to go to this clip at the end. We already played at the beginning, where Trump yet again reiterated that sending Americans to a foreign prison is something he would love. Of course, within the law, of course, he says, which is a meaningless statement when you realize that everything they're doing right now is illegal because they just claim, well, they're terrorists, therefore it makes it legal. No, it does not. That's the point, though, is that they say within the law, which allows a lot of the followers to go, well, he said he would do it legally, so we can ignore the fact that he's threatening to send Americans to a foreign prison. As long as it's legal, then it's okay, right? It's just absolutely ridiculous. A reminder, it says the Trump administration has revealed no details of its pact with El Salvador, which is kind of alarming when you think about it. We literally know nothing about this other than we're paying them $6 million, apparently to house a bunch of innocent people. No law in the United States authorizes the United States government to pay another country to imprison people. And yet they're doing it. And even saying that we can extend from there and maybe do so with Americans. Outrageous. Now, we played this already. I'll play both these very quick, because this is one of the examples we've been highlighting. Mr. Abrego. It says, this is wild, Aaron writes. There's no accusations in court, and we highlighted this one already, that he was involved in human trafficking. That was something that Leave It put out because I think she was told to say it. They've only ever claimed he was a leader of MS-13, even though he was picked up in a Home Depot parking lot in 2019. They picked him up with a bunch of people, released him with no charge, and just wrote down MS-13 on the piece of paper, but never charged him. He never got anything. And they later today claimed that means he's a leader of MS-13. But it turned out that all he had was some kind of paraphernalia or a hat, or I forget what it was. I'm trying to remember the exact details. There's so many cases we've gone over. The bottom line is that you can clearly show that the documents, I have the tweet right here. It was a Bulls hat. That's the one I was thinking of. So he wore a Bulls hat. Here's Aaron saying the evidence they submitted. He had a Chicago Bulls gear. A confidential informant simply said he was part of it. That's it. Now you read their own documentation and the court document is included. You clearly see that they released him with no charge. How in the world that comes to today and they claim he's a leader of this gang? Secondarily, that they just happen to include that he's also human trafficking, because I think they know that will resonate with a certain crowd. But there is zero evidence to back that up, and that's what he's saying. He was involved. There's no even, they're not even presenting that to the court. They're not saying the court evidence they're presenting. They're not claiming he's human trafficking. So why are they saying that to the audience? Well, I think you know why. ICE and DOJ have said nothing like that to the judge. In fact, he writes, no one has ever even accused him of that outside of them presenting this to the media. This entire claim appears to be invented by the White House. So here's the most recent claim.
People should know who this individual is. He's not some Maryland father, as the mainstream media will make you believe. He's actually a member of MS-13 and was involved in human trafficking. It's unbelievable, the framing of this. Whether this man is in El Salvador or in a U.S. detention center, he should be locked up. And people...
God, it makes my skin crawl to think about how disgusting this is. This woman is repeating this because she was told to repeat it, or because Leave It said it, therefore we know it's true. Let's be clear, that's not backed up by evidence. So all the people screaming this, repeating this, are simply repeating a thing they were told is true. I'm willing to bet you most of them don't even know that stupid. They are convinced it's real because Trump said, or Biden said, whatever partisan narrative, that's what these people are, or they're knowingly lying to you. And the idea that he's not a father, well, he's a father, regardless of what you claim about him. And to argue that he's somehow, Vance literally said, because he had traffic tickets and other things, he's not really the father of the year. They're saying that for a reason. They're trying to dehumanize a man they know they illegally sent to a prison that does not belong, and that they now know shouldn't be there. And now they're admitting it was a mistake, and they still are pushing narratives like this. It is disgusting. These are bad people, guys. The lowest of the low, in my opinion. Here's Leave It saying it before that.
The vice president said he was a convicted member of MS-13. What evidence is there?
Now, again, convicted. See, they're lying all over the place. Even their own information proves he was never convicted. So they're caught. It's just like Netanyahu or the Israeli government going, no sirens were on. Oh, you have video of that? Oh, well, then they are. But here's another reason. They just jumped down the line. They're doing this right in front of you. Have the courage to call it out.
To back that up.
There's a lot of evidence, and the Department of Homeland Security and ICE have that evidence, and I saw it this morning.
Oh, okay, great. There's a lot. Great answer. What's the evidence? Oh, there's a lot of evidence. Understood. Moving forward. I guess that's enough for people in Twitter files universe that we live in. But the reality is that they're very clearly stressing the idea that this is somebody who is a gang member, a leader, and a human trafficker, just to get people leaning into a certain direction. Now, here's what's crazy. The Hill writes the article that says federal judge in scathing decision calls Trump deportation in El Salvador, or of El Salvador man, wholly lawless. Now, of course, they've gone out of their way to frame this as radical judges, which I think all of them are probably radically motivated for one political reason or another. It has not changed the reality of the dynamic that they can obviously challenge anything they're doing from a legal standpoint, and the Trump administration's executive branch has the right to challenge it back. Take it to the Supreme Court if you want to. That's how the system works. And the fact that Elon is out there bribing people to try to get judges out of place, even though they just failed, by the way, I didn't end up going into that because it didn't work out, but it's worth covering at some point. How we literally tried to bribe people to sign petitions to get rid of judges. I mean, it's after they just got done telling you Democrats are bribing everybody to vote. They're probably all doing that. What's crazy to me is this is lawless, regardless of whether you think that judge is politically motivated. It's provably lawless. What's funny is this guy goes, understand the judge didn't get his way, but the history of this El Salvadorian man is not that of some innocent person randomly selected. Oh, and this is Jeffrey, not a huge account, but simply highlighting this. And what is his evidence? Yeah, a screenshot of a document that simply reads out what the government said. I'm not making that up. And it literally says he was caught and detained back in 2019 and was subject to jail and deportation. No, he was not, because technically he was picked up and never charged or even actually arrested. He was simply picked up and released, never charged with a crime. And even then, if that was the case, he would still have to go have due process. It's just insane what we're dealing with. But Mr. Garcia asked to be released on bail in the meantime, prompting a deeper inquiry of the man. This is the narrative they're spinning, even though you can prove this is not true. Hold on, I just lost my screen. There we go. The bottom line to kind of jump to the end here is he says, his attorney, they claimed asylum for Garcia using a particular argument. They said that he had credible lack of fear. And okay, so you just admitted that he had asylum. They did give him that, and they sent him back anyway. That's a crime. The judge considered the asylum application and offered a shocking ruling. They granted a reprieve from deportation. Now, this is a gross misrepresentation of the entire situation. Really the point to make is that how crazy it is that you can just highlight and cite a screenshot of the typed out narrative that the government says. How do you think that's evidence? I mean, how do you think that's proof? Evidence, yes, a data point. But it's actually terrible evidence because it's not even anything you can prove. It is simply what they said. And this person says, literally the only evidence the government offered was an unsubstantiated allegation from an informant and a picture of him in a Bulls jersey. See, this is easily proven directly from the court documents. Jeffrey here seems to think just whatever the White House said that day is more important. That's where we are right now. Now, Melnick also points this out. This was what they said in response to this. A federal judge ordered the U.S. to return the Maryland man mistakenly deported. That was on the 4th. The White House says, we suggest the judge contact President Bukele because we're unaware of the judge having jurisdiction or authority over the country of El Salvador. I mean, that's about as gross as Bukele saying, oopsie, when they landed the plane and the judge told him to send it back. Like, they think this is a game or a joke. Like, this is not, like, that they can just, I mean, the reality is they do think they're on account, that they're having, what's the word? That they're not accountable. They can get away with whatever they want. The word that fits in there. The point is that the clear reality here is that they're taunting them. They're acting like we're above you. You can't do anything to us. Sorry, you can check with them. I mean, this is so insulting on so many levels. The idea that you are pretending that you can't just be like, hey, send that one back, the one that we're paying for you to hold, and they go, okay, here he is on a plane. Like, this is not some deep. These are people acting unilaterally, illegally, from both sides of this, in a national sense, in every sense, to pretend like they have some kind of system they have to apply to. Like, they're playing everybody and people are falling for it. But he says, can't get over how egregious this response is. And this is a lawyer speaking. He understands the law around this because it suggests a world where they can send anyone to El Salvador, even U.S. citizens, because they've said that, in total violation of law, so long as they get people out of the country before a judge can stop them. Think about how wild that is. It's a dangerous path to go down. Now, I agree with that. My point on top of it is, are we really going to pretend like that's true? Like they just can't deal with it? Oopsie, it's too late now? I mean, that's insulting to everybody. They're making fun of us. Now, BBC says U.S. judge scolds Trump officials for failing to return man deported in air. This was yesterday. It says a U.S. judge issued a scathing opinion against Trump administration after immigration officials admitted to having mistakenly deported him. Now, here's what's insane to me, is that we've now gone from that I'm completely wrong or anybody covering this is a liar. Glenn Greenwald, even though he's a constitutional lawyer, doesn't understand the Constitution because he was an illegal alien and he was breaking the law, blah, blah, blah. So now, oops, we made a mistake and we shouldn't have sent him. Okay, let's take a beat before we continue and let's reflect on the fact that that's what we were saying, that this was a mistake and they didn't, guys, if you can acknowledge that they made a mistake, even though we don't, that's not the reality. I'm not on screen, but those were air quotes you heard right there. The idea is that simply that you have to consider that there's others that they were mistaken about or that they never checked any of them. And this is the one they're trying to give you to kind of release the steam valve. Because I've proven this with other examples. This is not the only case. So again, if you're an honest person out there and still believe you're supporting Trump, you do what you want, but just have the honesty and the integrity to call out that you know this is wrong. You know it. If you're an honest person, you know it. And it says the opinion issued by the U.S. judge, and this is what's interesting, the Judge Paula, I think it's Zenas with an X. I mean, do you remember the whole push in the beginning? Oh, those are radical judges, and look there, but what's funny is you have seen examples from judges on the left and the right who have continued to push back on a lot of this stuff, whether it's deportations, USAID. Funny how they only want to highlight the one that Loomer can make some claim about. This is the guy that tied to this. Well, sure, they're all politically radical. I think they're all like that. But you fail to acknowledge the ones that aren't leaning left when you don't want, it's just dishonest everywhere. Now, this one, I believe, was appointed by Obama, but my point is the same. The legal reality is clear, and they have continued to see it on both sides of this. Now, it says on the opinion issued by that judge on Sunday reaffirms her earlier ruling that demands Garcia be returned to the U.S. by Monday night. Now, technically, I believe it was Monday today. Maybe it was Monday midnight. Right now, as I understood it, they were already supposed to have him back by today, middle of the day. But that does say Monday night, so maybe there's different. They change, but it says the judge says Mr. Garcia was seized, quote, without any lawful authority, easily proven and true, and held without legal basis, easily proven and true, in quote direct contravention of U.S. law, easily proven and true. Whoever says it, it's easy. I've gone over this extensively, guys. It's very easy to back up with the law, the Constitution. Trump officials argue that they are unable to return him because, get this, they lack the authority to remove him from a jail in El Salvador, a man that they're literally paying to house there. So stop paying him then. Maybe he'll just send him back anyway. Like, it's so insulting to pretend like their hands are bound. We're going to break the law to do this, but we can't do it back. I mean, it's incredible to me. The Justice Department has asked an appeals court to dismiss the judge's order. Now, that's what happened last. So they were coming right up to the timeline when they were supposed to get the guy back, and then they reached out to an appeal in regard to this particular Supreme Court to argue that they basically to dismiss the judge's order. The appeals court is expected to rule by Sunday. Oh, wait, hold on, make sure I didn't get this wrong. I believe, well, let me go through the rest of the articles. This is still kind of developing. This article is from yesterday. I thought there was a mention of Supreme Court in the last ones. Either way, to be clear on this article, it's saying that the appeals court is expected to rule by Sunday evening. So you know what kills me about this, guys? Is that we're talking about this being now. I can't tell if they're talking about this from yesterday, as in yesterday evening. They're supposed to rule on that or not. We'll go through the other articles. The point is that they pushed back, and they're supposed to rule on whether that's the case or not. Now, I believe this has gone higher. Let's keep going in the articles. And this is from today. Trump administration asked Supreme Court to block order returning the man. Now, really take a second and think about how crazy that is. Like, to think about how insane it is to admit that you did this wrong, right? We made a mistake. This guy shouldn't have been sent to the torture camp we sent him to. Then not only not trying to get him back, but fighting to maintain that wrong thing. Like going out of your way to not just, like you could say, well, our hands are tied. That's one thing. But for them to go after them and try to, they're like, again, look at the article, guys. Look what it says. Trump administration asked the Supreme Court. That's what I was saying. So it's gone. So just to be clear about the rapid fire information there, it seems that yesterday they put it to a appeals court and they got denied. Now they're asking the Supreme Court today, right before the deadline, to stop this. Why would you do that? Why would you go to the Supreme Court to be like, please stop them from rectifying the mistake we made? I mean, it's dishonest, illegal, corrupt. I don't know. You decide for yourself. Why would you ever do that unless it's because you want that person to stay there, whether or not they deserve to be there? Why would you think that makes sense? Think about it for a second. Now, what the article says, the Trump administration on Monday, that's today, asked the Supreme Court to block a court order requiring it to return a Maryland man who was sent to a notorious prison in El Salvador. I think, honestly, genuinely think they don't want him to come back because it'll be a huge legal problem for them. And that means they're willing to put a man in a dangerous prison that does not belong in for the rest of his life just to stop you from having a problem. They're honest people, clearly. The Justice Department argued in an emergency appeal to the justices that the U.S. District Judge, and this is the only argument they're making, overstepped her authority when she ordered the person to be returned. Even though they said they made a mistake, even though that's the legal rectification, right? Well, how do you make that better? Well, you bring it back. And they stand up and go, you don't have the authority to tell us to rectify our mistake? Well, that's exactly her authority. That's literally the authority of the check and balance of how the system works. I think they're desperately trying to misinform average people to think that somehow this is Democrats abusing their power, because that seems to be the best argument they have these days. In reality, they're all doing that. But it says the administration has conceded that Garcia, his last name, should not have been sent to El Salvador. Okay, because an immigration judge found he likely would face persecution by local gangs. That was the original point before they ever sent him, and that was the original idea of asylum, that he was granted. That's the reason that they broke, one of the many reasons they broke laws around this. But he is no longer in U.S. custody, and the government has no way to get him back, they argued. Totally. They can't just call Bukele and say, send him back, we'll stop paying you. Quote, the district court's injunction, which requires Garcia's release from the custody of a foreign sovereign and return to the United States by midnight. Oh, so it is midnight Monday. So tonight, which seems to be that they're not going to do that. We'll see what happens. Is patently waiting, it says. Now, what's interesting to me, if it turns out that he does make it back by tonight, what is that going to show you? The fact that they went out of their way to try to stop this, but clearly could have done it the entire time. I kind of don't think that's going to happen, but if it does, that'll be an important point to make. Clearly, they always could have, and they dragged their feet in every way they could to make sure he stayed in a dangerous prison. That just shows you what bad people they are. But I kind of get the sense that he's not going to be returned. They're going to take this as far as they can. It seems like they're pretty much committed to this illegal direction. But it goes on to say, a federal appeals court in Richmond, Virginia, that was what we were saying earlier, denied their request for the stay. There is no question, the second court ruled, that the government screwed up here. Obvious. Now, here is the last one, and this is from the 7th, but later in the day. Judge asks why Trump administration has made no attempt to fix the mistakes. Kind of the point we're making here, right? It seems like a logical point to make. It says, in a unanimous decision, the panel of 3 judges agreed that the original judge and the order requiring him to be brought back basically was legitimate and should not be stayed, and it needs to be before midnight tonight. The United States government has no legal authority, they write, to snatch a person who is lawfully present in the United States off the street and remove him from a country without due process. Oh my God, it's almost like exactly what we've been screaming for a week and a half. It's true and easy to verify. All these people acting like because some judge says it, therefore it must be the Democrats. You're lost in the partisan game. They're using it to play you, even if that's a real consideration. It always is. It's like the same point about the due process. If you can go to Grok and say, is that the case? And it goes, yes, clearly. Why would you keep ignoring this stuff? Like, I think it's clear that there's a lot of people that have a political agenda. So it's important, as always, to question everything and check everything for yourself, guys, because there's a lot of people in political fields, most of it, as far as I can tell, who are desperate to deceive you. It says the government's contention otherwise, that they are allowed to do this, and its argument that the federal courts are powerless to intervene are unconscionable. Better way to put that is simply wrong. It's just simply not the reality, but it is unconscionable. And it says, if it is truly a mistake, I would agree with that starting statement. This does not seem like a mistake to me. If it was truly a mistake, one would also expect the government to do what it can to rectify it, right? Most of us attempt to undo, to the extent that we can, the mistakes that we have made. But to the best of my knowledge, the government has not made that attempt here. Exactly. They're not even trying to make this better, so it speaks otherwise. In a concurring opinion, the U.S. Circuit Judge Robert King and U.S. Circuit Judge Stephanie Thacker said if the government wanted to prove the Maryland man was sent to El Salvador was a prominent member of MS-13, they had ample opportunity to do so, but has not even bothered to try. The same point about Yemen and all the rest, guys. If they had the evidence that would make it a slam dunk, it would have already been shoved in your face. It says the government has made no effort to demonstrate that Garcia is, in fact, a member of any gang because the evidence is pretty clear that he's not. And that's where they leave it, in hopes that their sycophant followers will carry the narrative for them. Now, Melnick also points out, and this is going back to the idea of the statement again, where they said that they, I don't know, you don't have the jurisdiction to, want to speak to Bukele about sending this person back. It says wrongful deportations are not new. And this goes back before this conversation. It's a good point to make. Just in general, in the past, there's been mistakes. You could argue in the past they were on purpose, but let's just say we could prove there was an accidental deportation. We know that's happened. Somebody gets picked up in the wrong context, happens to have the wrong, whatever it is, and they get sent. It's happened before. His point is that there has been examples in precedent set where they have brought them back. So why is it not as simple as that today? He says in most cases, ICE and or the Department of Justice acknowledge the mistake and work with the person's lawyers and their home country to reverse the error. Simple, right? Here, and it goes, here's a whole list of cases where they've done that before. So this is very common and very clear. The judge does have that authority. They're just trying to convince people otherwise for very obvious reasons. Now, Good Morning America put this out. DOJ places senior lawyer on leave in the case of mistaken deported man. Now, this is actually so incredibly telling to me. It says the Department of Justice has placed on indefinite paid leave the attorney who argued on behalf of the government just to make sure this man stayed in El Salvador. And it says the sources, the acting deputy director of the Office of Immigration Litigation was told by officials of the DOJ, get this, that he was being placed on leave over a failure to zealously advocate for the government's interests. It's just a great way to develop loyalty by just getting, you didn't win, so you're fired. At the end of the day, my gut tells me one of two things. Either this guy's not a terrible person and realized that this was gross what he was doing, but still did his job, and maybe they sensed that and didn't like that he wasn't just blindly advocating for the government narrative, or he just tried and didn't win, and that's enough. It's just we're dealing with some pretty gross people. I think it's important, and it's not left and right. It is simply the way our government's operated for a long time. Now, in regard to Garcia and where he is, and this is just simply what Brave said, so take it for what you will, but I was just curious, right? So this is, and I actually thought this was of the mindset that I thought it was noon today. I misread that. The point is that right now it's 7 p.m. It's supposed to be midnight tonight. And even depending on where you are, I think that's still within the realm of so it's not there yet. And it said within the last hour, Garcia remains in a notorious mega jail in El Salvador. So I'll follow up tonight and see what changes. I get the feeling that's not going to shift. Now, last 2 points here. There's a couple interesting overlaps in regard to people that went to Guantanamo Bay. Now, I thought this kind of floored me today. I didn't even know I heard that floated, and I didn't think it was even happening. But apparently, since February, there's been a bunch of people sent to Guantanamo Bay for these same conversations. Why didn't we talk about this? It's just kind of crazy to me. Now, David says, here is the declaration of a man who entered the United States legally and was sent to Guantanamo Bay, explaining the cruelty with which the Trump officials treated him. Now, I would be clear to say that this is not unique to Trump. Clearly, everyone's got their political leanings, but the point is this has been going on for a very long time. Obama signed the NDAA in regard to indefinite detention of American. Trump and Biden have continued that, and all of them signed it forward, but recognize it's a nonpartisan thing. But here's what I found most important. Here's the actual, and this is specifically about Luis Alberto Castillo Rivera. Now, all of these people, it's the same conversation, guys. It's what we're talking about today. People that were legally, let's put it this way, illegally removed from the country, no criminal record. Now, this is declaration of Luis Alberto Castillo Rivera. The point I think is important. I entered the United States on January 19th with a Border Patrol appointment. This is in court doc. You can verify this stuff, guys. The reality is he set up an appointment. This guy was not trying to break in the country. He set up an appointment to claim to either start the process or in this case, claim asylum. It says, despite following the legal process and having family in the United States, I was detained and never given a chance to see a judge or present my asylum case. That's against the law. That's against U.S. law, whether you agree with it or not. Somebody who's trying to enter the country legally, trying to set up an asylum case is not an illegal alien. That's not a reality of that, even if that is what they call them in the limbo. My point is, it's not the way that people are dealing with this now, acting like that means he broke the law. Clearly, he did not if he tried to go through the process. That's very important to me. So my point is, this is somebody who was sent to Guantanamo Bay and is currently still there. And of course, you can read this and recognize that they were treated like you might imagine, like everything else we've discussed. Now, here's his story. Family of a Venezuelan man sent to Guantanamo. And his family, again, just like the rest of them, maybe they're lying. But you know how we would find out if they were lying? If he was given due process and evidence was presented, which it never was. My brother is not a criminal, they say. Now it says, Luis Alberto Castillo, a father of one from Venezuela, entered the United States on January 19th, one day after Donald Trump became president for a second term. By February 4th, Mr. Castillo was on a plane to a U.S. Navy base at Guantanamo Bay. Talk about overkill, for crying out loud. I mean, especially since there was a process underway. It says that day, the Department of Homeland Security declared that those who had been transferred to the island represented, quote, the worst of the worst, and were all members of the Venezuelan criminal group Tren de Aragua. By the way, the same exact claim they made about people sent to El Salvador. Even now they've kind of watered down, oh, no, maybe MS-13, or maybe not even at all, or maybe not criminals, or maybe they were here legally. They're lying to you. That's a fact. So if we hear this worst of the worst, and we recognize this guy was arguably not part of that and was sent in that group, then there's something to be questioned here. This is his brother was not a gang member, she says, rather an everyday Venezuelan, just like the rest, who seems to have been fleeing the country because of the U.S. attacks on this country. The economic crisis, she writes. My point is that's because of the U.S. government. Says, my brother is not a criminal. This is all discrimination and xenophobia just because he's Venezuelan. Given that, and let's be clear again, we know that's the fact in some cases that we already saw. So you could argue that's not true here, but you know it's already happening because we can prove that. So 50-50 as far as I can tell. Given that Mr. Castillo had spent such little time in the United States, she questioned how the U.S. government could have determined that he was a member of this gang or was worthy of such a harsh treatment. Because both those things are important, different, right? Just because you might be part of something does not mean you justifies sending you to a concentration camp. Now it says, after he entered the United States, officials suspected Castillo of being a member of the gang because of his tattoos. According to two people familiar with his case who were not authorized to discuss it publicly. Now look, tattoos are a data point, something you can consider in the investigation, but to claim somebody's a gang member or a terrorist, you damn well better have evidence to prove it. Not just, that's a tattoo, get rid of him because he's brown. That's what we've been seeing. That's already been proven. Now it says he did not admit to being a part of the criminal group. Later, officials assessed his tattoos and interviewed him, and they found that he did not appear to have ties with Tren de Aragua. This is on the record. In an email, a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security said that Mr. Castillo was in the United States illegally and had final deportation orders issued by a federal judge. But you know the story, guys. He was trying to go through asylum. Now it says this is what we've seen, like I said, the limbo, where the Trump administration seems to be just trying to reach some kind of quota and are just getting rid of people that are here in that limbo process, even though there's plenty of other people wandering around the country that did hop the fence or sneak in who they don't know are there. They're going after people that are trying to do the right thing. So you're essentially getting rid of the people, by and large, that are not the criminals by going after it that way. That shows you that it's not even about any of the narrative they're trying to tell you. It's about trying to convince you of something while doing something else. That's my opinion, obviously. says, during further assessment, intelligence officers could not definitively determine whether he was part of Tren de Aragua or not. That's their quote. So they got rid of him anyway, just to be safe. That's not how this works, guys. It says, in the interview, Mr. Castillo's sister shared a screenshot that indicated that he had not tried to evade authorities when he entered the country. That's on the record in the court documents. The image included details of an appointment that he had already made with the Border Patrol to seek asylum. See, they're abusing the situation, guys, and all these rabid followers make every one of them out to be, they claim, terrorists and monsters, the worst of the worst. No, these are average people who are suffering because of U.S. foreign policy, who are genuinely trying to go through the right process, who are being sent to concentration camps. Meanwhile, the people that, you can go in so many directions. The weaponized migration elements or the Mossad agents, or they're all flooding through this country while they're going after people that are trying to do the right thing. It says over the last week, the United States government has sent more than 80 people, 80, to Guantanamo Bay. How is that possible? As part of a larger plan by the Trump administration to hold as many as 30,000 migrants at Guantanamo Bay. So far, all the detainees are believed to be Venezuelans. There's something to that, guys. That's not an accident. It says the Pentagon has described the first few Guantanamo arrivals as high threat illegal aliens. Except that he wasn't illegal and he wasn't high threat. So the question is, have they proven any of these? Or is it just a floated narrative of getting the bad guys while you're simply scooping up brown people and getting rid of the country? Or anybody calling out Israel, by the way. Mr. Castillo is believed to be among the first 10 men who were sent there. Right, so they're telling you, high threat illegal aliens. We can prove he's not. So if he's part of the group they claim, then we should question whether the rest of them are as well. Very simple. It says, like many Venezuelans, Mr. Castillo had left his country years ago and was living in Colombia washing cars. His sister said he was barely scraping by and left for the United States in hopes of making more money to give everything to his son. And remember, Rubio, who's currently in power, was one of the ones back in the last administration going, come on, Venezuelans, come over here. We'll give you asylum. Right? He did that. He posted about that more than once. Not only did they completely leave a lot of them in limbo, left stranded, but the point is many of them have followed after that when he invited them, and now they're in El Salvador. It's pretty messed up. Now, last two things to cover here, guys. Here's another example, by the way, of how completely unconstitutional this is. And Marco Rubio seems to just be sprinting down this direction, even though people are calling him out. So this is actually pretty crazy to me, because we've been talking about the Sudan for a while now, right? Here's one of Robert's articles. The U.S.-Israeli hand in Sudan's horrifying civil war. The U.S. and Israel are on the ground involved in what's going on here. We've proven this for a very long time. So what's crazy about this is now, because the Sudan, basically the argument in the beginning, we've said this many times, is the Sudan in general, they were just broadly called, supporters of terrorism. Because they were at odds with Israel. And the U.S. government came in and said, look, if you align with Israel, if you normalize with Israel, we'll take you off the list. And the only way you can read that is either they were never terrorists and they just did it to coerce them, or they were terrorists and they're okay with that as long as they work with Israel. It's pretty simple. And so but the point was, you could prove that they were no different than when they first did that. So my point now is that I think what happened, the only difference is they've lost control of where it's going. And the people of Sudan are not allowing them to take over, not allowing Israel to take over the country. And so they're doing this. Marco Rubio on the 5th says, I'm taking action to revoke all visas held by South Sudanese passport holders and to restrict any further issuance to prevent entry into the United States, effective immediately. Due to the failure of South Sudan's transitional government to accept the return of the repatriated citizens in a timely manner. Oh, I see. So they're trying to dump people into the country, and they're simply saying, don't. This is them trying to abuse their power. Now, whatever you think about what this is, it's the same conversation. These people have visas. So if you're going to revoke their visas, you have to present evidence, guys. It's simple. It's the same conversation. It's in principle no different than them kicking you out of the country for no reason as an American. That's how this works. But Marco Rubio is doing this, and I'm willing to bet you anything because Israel asked. That's my personal opinion. Either way, it's unconstitutional and illegal. And I said another example of the government not respecting constitutional rights, due process in this case, which verifiably applies to even illegal immigrants, let alone people with visas and green card holders, despite the claims by partisan screamers. Now, here's some responses to Marco Rubio saying this. It says, this decision directly contradicts the temporary protected status. By the way, that's what Marco Rubio was offering these people Clearly, nothing is sacred to them. They'll promise the world and then pull the rug out from underneath you. It says, directly contradicts temporary protected status that the United States has previously pledged to provide to these individuals due to the security conditions in their country. Now realize they were trying to use that to make it seem like Maduro was hurting them. Maybe he was. You can decide for yourself. But realize what they were doing to the country is why these people were suffering. It says this move marks a formal abandonment of the humanitarian principles that have long set the United States apart from others, which frankly, I don't agree with that. It's the claims, yes, but for a long time, this government has not been what they claim, signaling a renunciation of the values that have historically supported the vulnerable in times of crisis. They don't care about any of that. Here's another answer, or response rather. He says, so South Sudanese who have never had the right to vote for their leaders since 2011, that's because of what they're doing in this country, the US, Israel, and the UK and others, and many who fled during the Civil War after 2013 are being punished for the actions of the two unelected leaders who keep derailing elections and the economy. Yet another venal MAGA policy. I mean, whether you want to make it MAGA or not, he's accurate. You're punishing people for what you're doing to this country. That's who these people are. Now, again, read this, understand how blatant this is. The U.S. and Israel are the ones manufacturing this. Lastly, just to show you the other side of the conversation, Secretary Rubio makes a completely unconstitutional plea to remove passports from people they don't like, and Jack Posobiec jumps in and says, I love deportations. Yeah, some good people here, guys, clearly. Objective journalists who care about the Constitution, right? No, it's cheerleading the government. You know, otherwise known as the rebels fighting the deep state, right? Now, Qatar U.S., in case you missed that part of it, is still actively supplying names to the government to remove from this country. An Israeli Zionist organization is giving names of Americans, too, as well as anybody in this country, legally or otherwise, who are simply saying things about Israel and saying, get them out of this country, just like Mohammed Khalil. This is 48 hours ago. The CEO of World Batar was in New York, helping Batar U.S. compile dossiers to deport pro-Palestinian students. Today, this is the 5th, I believe, or the 6th. Yesterday, he's in Gaza fighting and killing Palestinians with the IDF. This is not a youth movement, guys. This is not some small group. This is a apparatus tied directly into the Israeli government. It's a global fascist network, she writes, building blacklists in the West and pulling triggers in Gaza. Think about how wild that is. Here he is, literally in New York City, fighting to deport Americans and others who support Israel or support Palestine. Here he is in Gaza, killing children. Pretty clear. Now, here, Melnick also points out, in regard to the undocumented, well, rather Jacob here says, Scoop, DHS is asking IRS, and this is the Washington Post reporting this, to locate 7 million unsuspected, undocumented immigrants using confidential tax records. It's a massive escalation by the DHS to use tax system for mass deportation. IRS officials are aghast, say it's likely illegal. I'm sure they won't stop. They'll still comply and do what they're told, like most government agents do. But he says this is incredibly bad. What the IRS would be saying to millions of people if they cave to Trump's extraordinary demands, which I'm pretty sure they will, is don't file your taxes. Because if you do, we'll use it against you. One of the best arguments I've heard to not file your taxes, but it says it would undermine and blow up generations of trust building. It's madness. Now, see, I disagree with that. The point is, he's, I guess, arguing that the government in some way is, trust building. I don't think you truly understand what they've been doing with the IRS. But my point, though, guys, is this is insanely a violation of your privacy. This is, in my opinion, a foreign entity using U.S. information like Doge and the trillion databases with their AI models to go after you, to go after people who are calling out Israel. Now, we talked about this in the most recent show on the 3rd. Americans speaking out about Israel's genocide could be next. In principle, it is the same, because it is. Now, I hate to say it again, guys, but I definitely did forget to put the links on this, so I apologize for that. I did this show on the fly, like right before we were leaving for the carnival, and so I guess I didn't save the links, so I'm sorry. That rarely happens, but it seems to have happened a few times over the last, I think twice over the last couple of weeks. So again, if you just watch the video, you can still see the URL in the shot. But that's still my mistake, so I apologize for that, because I always include the links for you guys. But the point is, if you can't see the principles the same, I don't think you understand the Constitution. So we have to realize that what they're already doing is chilling. And it already indicates that if they just decided to, the same legal groundwork applies, which I argue is absent, but they'll make the argument if they want to. So here, again, just to end, and I'm going to actually end with a quick reading of something I think is relevant from Jacobin. But here's the first clip. He said this on the 26th or the 25th. I forget exactly the day. It was right around here. And then I'm going to show you the clip he just did again, just in case you thought this was a one-off. It's definitely not.
And I just want to thank him. He's going through a lot, what they're doing to him. And these people are going to be caught, and they're going to be caught, and they're going to be prosecuted. And from what they tell me, I see this just by watching your programs and reading the news, but from what they tell me, they could get 20 years in jail, and they'll get it. I'll tell you, there's going to be no leniency, and there'll be no pardons. I can tell you that right now.
And you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they get, you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they'll go to one of these prisons in El Salvador. Do you think with the way that the judges have been issuing injunctions, it would be easier or harder to send these Tesla domestic terrorists to a jail in El Salvador than these MS-13 or Tren de Aragua guys?
Well, I view these people as terrorists just like others. These are, when I looked at those showrooms burning.
Clearly, Tesla terrorists. Okay. And what's funny, it's Ducey again in this next clip. So I feel like there's more coordination here, but simply going, what about sending Americans to El Salvador? So, I mean, you could argue simply that it's just a threat. It's just floating the idea to scare you into place, but it's the same difference as pretending, Greenland and all this. Oh, he's just trolling you guys until we start to see legislation passed, right? Maybe that was never the plan. Maybe the legislation took on a life of its own. That's not what they intended. It doesn't change the fact that it's now happening. It is in principle the same thing. We are watching them at least build the narrative. I mean, how about this? How about Trump is just saying this to scare people into place, and then a Democrat administration comes in next and uses it? We have to realize why this is such a chilling step. And now you could have, maybe he just said it one-off. Nope, here he is again. Again. Now, this time a little bit more reiterating the idea of, well, within the law. But look, if we have not made a good enough case today, then I'm not doing my job for how clearly this is already outside the law. That he is literally pretending because we, declare Tren de Aragua terrorists, therefore that means they can apply some foreign policy to this and say you can just deport you with no reason because national security. Well, even though they have unconstitutional, I would argue, illegal laws in place, if that makes sense to you, it should, doesn't change the fact that it's still repugnant to the Constitution. But overall, the point is that within the law simply means whatever they say the law is. And we see that right now, where they're literally talking about they're a terrorist because we named them terrorists, therefore we don't have to give them due process. But yeah, they do. It's simple. That's what the judges say. That's what the reality is. That's the Supreme Court says. And here they are. So when he says now that within the law, that is pretty meaningless, I would argue. The point you should hear is, I would love that, sending people to El Salvador, Americans.
El Salvador, the president there said he would be willing to take American citizens in the federal prison population. Is that one of the ideas you're going to be discussing?
Well, I love that. If we could take some of our 20-time wise guys that push people into subways and that hit people over the back of the head. And
okay, let's just start right there. Okay, so somebody's a terrible person, right? They're still an American citizen. They still have rights and due process. And the idea that there's any precedent in any kind to send them into another country, let alone to a horrifying prison that does not even remotely try to honor the human rights that the international community has said are absolute, that are necessary, that are required for something like this. They don't care about that. There's no precedent for this. To argue that you could just go, they're bad, send them somewhere else. My opinion on this is they're starting this conversation. I mean, this every day feels more and more like this is beginning to be the next thing they do. The idea being that they can start with the people that most people won't balk at. They're rapists. Send them over there. People are going to go, well, they're pretty gross. You can't, this is how this game works. They'll open that door to arguing that this because we may, and next thing you know, well, yeah, they're all those Palestinian terrorists that they're all beheading children, right? Or they aren't, and they're making lies up about narrative. This is how this always goes.
That purposely run people over in cars. If he would take them, I'd be honored to give them. I don't know what the law says on that, but I'd
be honored to give over American citizens to a foreign country because they committed crimes. It's incredible.
Imagine the law would say anything different. If they can house these horrible criminals for a lot less money than it costs us, I'm all for it. But
saving money, right? Who cares about constitutional rights and legalities? Save a couple pennies. You? Oh, no, not you average people, but Trump will.
I'd only do according to the law, but I have suggested that, why should it stop just at people that cross the border illegally? We have some horrible criminals, American grown, and
I mean, even the idea that you're suggesting, floating the idea that because you crossed the border illegally, that you should be sent to a Guantanamo Bay style. I mean, in this case, actually Guantanamo Bay, but also El Salvador. I mean, where are we in this world right now? Where the hell are all the good people in this country who just believe? I mean, I am of the mind that most people that support the Trump administration or any part of the paradigm are just convinced that they are doing what they think is right, that they're not bad people. Otherwise, what am I doing here? So where are you out there? How do you see this and go, yeah, that makes sense? It's obviously a problem just because he convinces you that every illegal alien, even though I'm already showing you that most of them aren't even illegally here, are somehow a problem. That is not human nature. You don't send them to a concentration camp from which they will never return because they're inconvenient to you. We are better than that. And I know that.
And if we have somebody that bops an old woman over the head, if we have somebody that is in jail 20 times and goes back and shoots people all over the place and then has a bad judge or a bad prosecutor that do nothing about him.
Okay. And now we're setting the important part, right? So, if it's just a Democrat judge that just didn't really do what they're supposed to, well, we'll send him to El Salvador. That's what he just said.
Worry about
or at least insinuated that.
His politics, and don't worry about that. I think if we could get El Salvador or somebody, but to take them, I'd be very happy with it, but I have to see what the law says. Okay, what else?
Right. So that's what they're going to fixate on. Well, he said the law. Well, we can already see right now that that's not the reality. The law is whatever they say it is. That's what a rampantly lawless element does. Well, here's an interesting part to end with. Jacobin, this was written on, where was the date again? It was a few days ago, there on the 14th. And here's what it says. Trump's pro-Israel McCarthyism is already boomeranging. Now it says neocons are taking advantage of the neo-McCarthyism Donald Trump has stoked against pro-Palestinian activists on the left to go after more anti-war voices on the right in his own administration. Gee, who could have seen that coming, right? The idea that this is not about left and right, that's about using those narratives, but ultimately it's about anybody that's saying the thing they don't want you to say. In this case, about Israel. It says such witch hunts never stop at their original targets. Now it says the trouble with McCarthyism is that once it gets going, it has a habit of ensnaring figures who were not meant to be its original targets. We're seeing this with the Donald Trump administration and broader right-wing crackdown on speech criticizing Israel, which yesterday was used, the 13th, to fire one of the administration's own foreign policy picks. This on the 13th, the news that Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis has been dropped from his planned appointment as a deputy director of national intelligence came as swiftly as the news that he had been offered and accepted the job in the first place. Davis, a senior fellow at Defense Priorities and a prominent conservative commentator on the pro-restraint side of the foreign policy divide, and you see why he's not liked, came under attack by pro-Israel voices. Right, so people that are advocating for a foreign government, and they didn't like him here, and so Trump pushed him out. That's kind of easy to see, right? And it says, as soon as the news of his hiring went public, focusing on his record of criticism of Israel's war on Gaza, the genocide. The Anti-Defamation League, an organization whose mission is meant to be combating anti-Semitism, that's not what it actually does. It's a spy organization for Israel, very easy to prove, warned that Davis's appointment would be extremely dangerous, pointed only to his views on Iran policy. Not getting into a war with Iran. And U.S. support for war in Gaza. Not anything anti-Semitic at all, but that was enough. And they kicked him out. I mean, you just can't misunderstand this, guys. Now, to end, I'll actually play something, since we mentioned the ADL, I'll play you a couple of clips from the ADL interview that we had with James Lee, which is a good interview. And the point is, guys, this is not secret. The ADL is a spy organization that is literally infiltrating this country as one aspect of Zionism. And I'll play these for you to end. But I'm hoping in general that the information here is easily accessible. It is. The links are below, that it's understandable, that it's clear. That if you are simply an objective person who cares about the truth, you can see that what they're doing is wrong. Now, maybe you still support Trump or conservatives and you think they're being played. Maybe they're all being blackmailed. Whatever makes it make sense for you. Just acknowledge that this is a problem. What's happening is not what we were promised. It's very simple. Now, if we can do that, we might be able to pressure this to maybe, continue banning PFAS, maybe stopping the mRNA shots, maybe not murdering people in foreign countries, just continue the positive momentum that we want, not screaming that what they're doing will lead to what we want and ignoring all of the bad things that are happening around it. That's just willful ignorance. That's hope. You could have hope, but don't let that guide the conversation. Acknowledge what's happening in front of you. So thank you for being here, guys. Appreciate your support. Now, tomorrow, the plan, ultimately, I'll be filming this documentary with Teese, and I believe we're going to be out most of the day. If I get back with enough time, I'll try to put something out. Either way, day after that, we'll be back. More to come. So thank you for tuning in, as always. Actually, and I'm going to leave you with these ADL clips. Oh, actually, before I leave that, I wanted to include this. Hold on. Oh, I don't need to show it to you since you've already seen it, but I'm going to include James Lee's interview. It'll be in the show notes at the very bottom. A very important interview discussion, simply entitled The True Nature of the ADL and How It Spies on Americans for Israel. I mean, it's airtight, guys. Very easy to see. So I'll end with these clips. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Also have the power to monitor social media activity across all major platforms and change social media algorithms the way they see fit. Don't believe me? Well, here's Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL.
We work with YouTube to get them to change their algorithms. We work with
Also have the power to monitor social media activity across all major platforms and change social media algorithms the way they see fit. Don't believe me? Well, here's Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL.
We work with YouTube to get them to change their algorithms. We work with Facebook on trying to use a redirect method, so when you search for Holocaust, you get directed to like a Yad Vashem page.
We opened a center in Silicon Valley back in 2017. And the woman who runs it, she's an ex-Facebook executive. I have software engineers and data scientists working at ADL. We're monitoring all this stuff, and we're working with all the platforms, by the way, Google and YouTube and Meta and Twitter and Reddit and Steam and Amazon, all these companies, from like Apple to Zoom. We work with all of them.
Some might call that a conspiracy fact. Just saying. And if their ability to influence big tech and media isn't disturbing enough, the ADL also partners with payment platforms like PayPal to monitor online transactions and cancel payment processing for those whose speech they disapprove of.
Just to understand this, is this simply a research effort, or is the ultimate goal, I imagine, to effectively defund them, which is to say that PayPal would effectively turn off the spigot, or at least turn off the ability for them to fundraise using PayPal?
That's correct, Andrew.
The investigation that was done by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, among the data that came out was that they would spy on organizations that were critical of Israel, spy on organizations that were critical of South Africa, and they would pass that information on to Israel, and they passed the information on to South Africa.
ADL is an Israeli spy organization masking around as a supposed civil rights group and doing real harm to the Jewish community writ large in order to run cover for the state of Israel.